Bloody great things, they is. Feet big as a horse's trough. I should know. A whole load of 'em stamped over the field yonder not 2 weeks hence. That's half a hundredweight of cabbages I shan't see again in a hurry. Work for the army, so I hear. Pretty thick, of course, but if you point them at the enemy and say go, well, I hear the crows don't get a look in, if you catch my meaning.
Ogres are large, loud creatures that go out of their way to make a formidable impression. Even in a violent world used to constant warfare, it is hard not to be in awe of a creature that can smash a man's ribs and send him flying through the air with a single swipe of an iron-bound club. Though if raw strength alone isn't enough to cause a stir, the sight of an ogre reaching out a meaty hand to lift up and consume his recently broken victim in great, greedy bites is sure to register horror in all but the boldest of hearts. Ogres are restless creatures, and their tribes are nomadic, ready to move camp at the drop of a well-gnawed bone. Ogres often wander far from their homelands, and when their armies are on the move, they leave behind them a trail of wreckage and little else. The great trump-camp-trump sound of an ogre army on the march is not a welcome one, for they will attack and plunder any settlement they come across. In this manner, armies resupply on the move, consuming any who are foolish enough to stay to defend their homes, and then devouring all of the livestock and anything else that looks vaguely edible. Any meat not devoured is carried off, so ogres and their enormous war beasts are often seen with huge haunches of meat and unplucked rib cages tied to their bodies. And so, as I said earlier, a large ogre with a huge gut, battle scars and trophies and battle paint is clearly a high-status beast, one not to be messed with. If challenged, an ogre will rarely turn down any sort of contest, be it belching, gut bulging, pit fighting, or eating. To turn these down is to lose face, so for an ogre it is better to take part in such contests, ritualized contests, of course, and to lose than to refuse altogether. Make sure you make a note of that. The first thing that one notices about ogres is how big they are. A full-grown ogre stands nearly twice as tall as a man, and several times as wide. Those who deal with ogres find they chiefly exhibit two distinct expressions, that of glum intimidation, and that of a sinister grin, which is far worse. Aside from rancid meat breath that could startle a dwarf sober, ogres have flat, overlapping teeth that are unusually strong, and they can bite through the bark of a sturdy Drackwald oak as easily as if it was the skin of a roast chicken. When an ogre grins, it is little to do with mirth, and everything to do with showing the victim what's going to happen next. Very different social cues, much like a chimp. The gut of the common ogre is of utmost importance to its owner, socially, spiritually, and physically. An ogre with a large gut, a gunt, one could say, is seen as wealthy and strong, for he has obviously eaten well to ensure such impressive girth. The ogre religion revolves around eating, and the gluttonous butchers believe that they can commune with their primitive god through this simple act of consumption. Perhaps this is due to the fact that the ogre's vital organs are situated far lower than a man's. These organs are protected by a thick, interlocking skein of musculature that can grind and crack food with terrific force, allowing the ogre to digest almost anything he cares to toss into his cavernous maw. But the common ogre leaves nothing to chance when it comes to his beloved abdomen, and protects his innards further with a large circular gut plate. This is usually made of metal, beaten into shape or even cast in a mould, and will commonly depict an icon important to the owner's parent tribe. The gut plate is secured around the ogre's waist by a heavy belt that is often used to store the ogre's eating tools. While ogres are undeniably fat, incredibly fat, underneath all of that blubber resides massive slabs of pure muscle. Their thick arms end in great ham-fisted hands that wield large clubs with lethal ease. An ogre's legs are stout and tireless, all the better to carry such a lumpen frame. With thick skin, as resilient as cured leather, and lungs as large as a man's torso, ogres can survive cold, inhospitable climates and are extremely tough, able to shrug off minor wounds. For this reason, only the richest and most elite ogres bother with armor beyond their gut plates, and instead stride into battle bare-chested. His body hair is lank and greasy, and although it is common for an ogre to be as bald as a boulder, it is rare indeed that one can be found without facial hair. Presumably cultivated to strap morsels of food that escape being shoveled into his mouth by his great grasping hands. It is common amongst many tribes to tattoo themselves or daub themselves with war paint, although, as ogres are not hygienic in the least, it is hard to distinguish what is tribal marking and what is post-dinner gristle. Now, no one who's ever smelt an ogre will believe this, but they are an exceedingly proud race, and none more so than the mercenaries who have ventured to the land of men for money. To an ogre, his status is everything. It will dictate whom he might marry, if one can call it marriage, where in the ogre lands he might live, when he gets to eat, what his god will think of him, and in short, everything that is important to an ogre. To this crude race, might is right, and this is a large part of what will create the level of his status. An ogre is not a very intelligent creature. Learned scholars describe them as thick as two short planks, meaning that they have sufficient intelligence to nail the two planks together and beat the observer over the head with it. Indeed, for an ogre's brain is extraordinarily small in comparison to its body, yet their skulls are very many times thicker to protect what little intelligence remains within. Rumour has it that by putting an ear close to an ogre's head, it is possible to hear the ocean. This, however, seems an unlikely speculation, as no one in their right mind would dare to put his ear that close to such a ravenous creature's mouth. Or, it has to be said, to put his nose so close to a creature as smelly as an ogre. But it is true that most ogres are somewhat dim, and as a race do not invent things or create anything of beauty or lasting worth. Instead of cunning or intrigue, ogres are straightforward, being wholly untroubled by such things as morality or worries over the questions of good or evil. If ogres can get what they want, which is food and wealth, without fighting, they will do so. But if it's more advantageous to annihilate and eat their opposition, then so be it. Ogres are an arguably benign race, going about their business with little or no malice, and although far from bright, they have an uncanny, business-like sense to recognize if their victims are worth more alive than dead. It is a plum situation to have nearby villagers pay a tithe of livestock every cycle of the moon in order to prevent an ogre attack. Over time, such arrangements pay more than if the ogres had descended en masse and eaten the whole lot. And the biggest-brained of the ogres can plan such things out. Yet there is one belief that unites ogres across the world, beaten into them at infancy and carried with them to the grave. Might makes right, A strong creature may take what he likes from a weaker creature, including life and limb. Every aspect of the culture of the Ogre Kingdoms revolves around this central tenet, engraved on the mind of every inhabitant, from the scrawniest nobbler to the mightiest tyrant. Ogres go to great lengths to illustrate their prowess, although an ogre's status can quickly be assessed by his physical size and the dimensions of his gut, or his gunt, as I would prefer to say. Nonetheless, ogres adorn themselves with trophies taken from the cave beasts that they have defeated. Daub war paint on bare flesh to indicate tribal allegiance, and love to take names to refer to their personal strengths. They also ritually scar themselves to prove that they feel no pain. A full-grown bull arrayed for battle is a daunting sight. A leader such as a bruiser or tyrant, positively terrifying.
He's the boss. That's that. You'll do what he says like the rest of us. We all do. You try give him lip, he'll pull your arms off and eat 'em before you've shut your trap.
Dominance within ogre society is often regulated by two things: power and guts. The stronger the ogre, the higher up he is in their brutish tribal hierarchy, and the fatter his gut, the more obvious his power is shown to his friends and enemies. The largest and most powerful ogre within the entire kingdom is known as the Overtyrant, the current ruler holding this lofty title being the infamously obese Greasus Goldtooth. Below him stands a large collection of lesser tribal rulers who are slightly less obese, known simply as tyrants, and are typically the rulers of their own tribe or petty kingdom within the Mountains of Morn. They naturally rise to rule and do so with an iron fist, literally, for ogres commonly wear bladed gauntlets just for this purpose. The largest ogres under the tyrants are known as the bruisers, and these are contenders for tribal power and assume lesser command duties until they are ready to challenge the tyrant. Dissension within a tribe is handled with sudden and predictable violence, and any who question a tyrant's decisions must be prepared to fight the ruler in a match to the death. Before such a duel, each ogre removes his gut plate, an ominous sign, as the victor in such a contest is expected to feast on the guts of the loser. Ogres refer to this traditionally as a guts-out challenge. Ascension to tribal rule is not entirely hereditary, since all an ogre can do is defeat the current tyrant. Yet it does follow a similar, if not gruesome, line of succession. As the most powerful ogres tend to sire the strongest offspring, a tyrant's fiercest challenges will often come from his own progeny. Thus begets a generational cycle of violence where a tyrant eventually faces his most ambitious and fattest son in a challenge, and to remain as ruler, he must beat down and eat his own rebellious offspring, or be eaten in turn. Ogres, being what they are, find this normal and speak proudly of relatives who put up a good showing. Ogre tyrants are bullies of the first degree, and unleashing abrupt violence helps them keep an iron rule over their tribe. A common tradition amongst tyrants is to pull off a limb or two off anyone who offends them, such as those who speak too much, or any ogre that accidentally eats one of the tyrant's favourite nobblers. The commonly used phrase,
"That'll cost him an arm and a leg,"
stems from this practice. The arms or legs in question are most often eaten, but some tyrants use them to bludgeon the offender. The ogre tyrant Malbob Mountain Smasher even earned the name Big Arm after pulling a giant's arm out during a friendly dispute. From that day on, Malbob used the massive limb as a club until it started to go off, that is. Then he ate it.
The Maw was born from the fire. The earth shook at its coming. The flames ate many tribes. To the mountains some fled.
The ogre race, no matter what kingdom or lands they hail from, all pay homage to a ravenous, all-consuming god, known in their tongue simply as the Great Maw. The Great Maw, alongside its lesser offspring, the Fire Mouth, are the primary and sole deities of the ogre race. All ogres pay homage to these malevolent deities, not out of any sense of love or admiration, but one of total raw fear. The Great Maw was the one responsible for the near destruction of the ogre race, remember. Their once beautiful and plentiful homeland, now a scorched and barren wasteland, as punishment for their sins. It was the Great Maw that now cursed the ogres' once full bellies into gaping holes from which no amount of food or substance could ever hope to fill. From the moment of its arrival, no ogre could ever dare to question its existence, for all he has to do is listen to the hunger which growls within his guts, to know that the curse the Great Maw has placed upon their race is tangible. There are a great many social and often religious rituals shared by all the tribes that make up the Ogre Kingdoms, of which the most important are feasts. Feasts are special meals, with the entire tribe present, that can last for days or even weeks. Consuming meat is a religious matter for the ogres, for to eat a thing is to show superiority over it, and it is a way of emulating the Great Maw, their all-consuming deity. Feasts aren't just about eating, and central to any major event are contests. Some are light-hearted sport for boasting rights, such as belching contests or nobbler fighting, but most are strength tests, such as gut barging, face cracking, and the like. Championship rounds are fought in the pit, while the rest of the tribe cheers and jeers. Leadership challenges and personal grudges are often fought during special feasts, and regardless of the outcome, whoever wins will doubtlessly hoist himself out of the maw pit and call for yet more feasting. Only an Overtyrant can call a great feast, a gathering of all tribes. The top ogres from every tribe travel vast distances to make a great feast, dragging with them the largest game they or their associated hunters can kill, especially gifted ogres. The loudest bellower, for instance, are given the honour of carrying the tribe's maw-tooth. Upon arrival of the great feast, each maw-tooth is placed around the maw pit, recreating the fanged hole that is the ogre deity. Greasus Goldtooth, the current Overtyrant and ruler of the Goldtooth tribe, is especially known for his massive, weeks-long events, where gifts are given to loyal tribes and the disfavoured often meet misfortune in bloody and spectacular fashion.
Pray hark to brave Sir Baldrin's tale, who travelled far to the mountain vale, to slay an ogre, fiend or drake, and meet his lady of the lake. Dismounting now, Sir Baldrin strode, further still up the mountain road. From nook and cranny, hungry eyes did stare, then widen in despair. And thus it was that ogre foul stepped out and gave a fearsome growl. I'll grind your bones to make my bread. And the knight replied, I'll have your head. Sir Baldrin charged with great sword raised. His downward stroke the ogre grazed. the monster's club came arching down and landed hard on Baldrin's crown. There came a grisly snapping sound. The knight was pitched unto the ground, but here Baldrin's tale does not end. What awaits our Bretonni friend?
Ogre society is centered around two important aspects of their culture and way of life: eating and fighting. And we can see the parallel here between strength and size of gut being the main factors that affect the ogre's status in the hierarchy, and eating and fighting is the two main aspects of their culture and way of life. Ogres frequently challenge each other to contests of physical strength, especially on feast days or during a bout of ogre games. These contests are also used as leadership challenges. They range from the relatively light-hearted belching contest, where the worst an ogre can expect is to be showered by gobbets of saliva and half-eaten food, to bouts of pit fighting, a lethal blood sport that has gained popularity in the old world. It is permitted, in fact expected, that an ogre pit fight will involve weaponry of some sort. This generally includes iron fists, heavy chains, punch daggers and bladed helmets. Suffice to say, the pit fights staged by mankind are pale in comparison, bloodless and tame next to the extreme violence of an ogre bout. Another favourite ogre game is gut barging, held in higher esteem than such pastimes as face-cracking or fist-splinter, for it is as much about the girth as it is might. Each ogre grabs hold of his opponent's belt and attempts to force his opponent to the floor with a combination of strength and weight. His efforts centered on the gut. Sinews strain and muscles bulge, with neither combatant giving an inch, until after much belching, spitting, threatening and roaring, much of which comes from the audience, one ogre finally buckles and is forced to the dirt. If both ogres survive an ogre game, the winner is permitted to eat a part of the loser as a victory spoil. Should the contest be recreational or merely to ascertain who gets first cut of a slain foe, this may be a couple of fingers, an ear, or a nose. However, if the game in question is brought about by a leadership challenge, argument over land, or personal grudge, the rivals remove their gut plates before the bout, a very serious sign. The victor in a gut-out contest will invariably beat the loser to death with his bare hands and eat his bloody corpse then and there in front of the cheering audience. In this way, the ogre not only gained the strength of the vanquished opponent, but also the respect of his tribe. Many of these recreational and ceremonial games are staged during or after an ogre feast, when the tribe is well fed, and the games therefore become less likely to turn into a full-scale bloodbath. Feasts are of religious importance to the ogres, and given enough meat, they will take any excuse to hold one. The guest of honour at these feasts will sit at the right hand of the tyrant's throne, and is therefore permitted the second finest cut of the meat. In practice, this is often the hunters that took down and brought the meat back to the tribe in the first place. Hallmarks of an ogre feast include fireplaces the size of stables, and massive trough-like trestle tables around the edge of a moor pit, a sinking, stinking hole in the ground filled with a morass of rotting meat, body parts and busted weaponry in which the ogres fight their bloody games. Although other races might employ minstrels at a feast, ogres have no real concept of music, and prefer volume above skill. Thus an ogre who can shout louder than his fellows is considered a gifted performer. Their feasts resound with bellowing, hollering and belching, as well as the omnipresent crunch of meat and bone. However, the butchers know full well that their tribe appreciates diversity of the meat as well and as much as the next cave full of predators. Whilst the traditional eating songs resound through the feast halls, the butchers punctuate steaming platefuls of cave beast with raw Bretonian and wild garlic, tough dwarf meat served in a gromril case, thick sausages stuffed with the finest Empire soldiery, and, widely seen as a delicacy, tender elf legs fried in horse blood. This is usually washed down with ogre beer, a thick, viscous and foul concoction, with equal quantities of honeycomb and hornet swimming in its murky depths. Ogre beer is intoxicating enough to hospitalize a dwarf, and is commonly taken from a drinking horn snapped from the skull of a beast the owner has killed himself. The greatest feasts are staged after the defeat and subsequent ransacking of a great caravan. The mile-long trading convoys that crawl through the Badlands towards the Ogre Kingdoms and finally Cathay. These armoured land trains are invariably well defended, often by rival ogre tribes. But when a predatory ogre tribe does finally manage to conquer one, it finds itself knee-deep in luxury goods, gold and quality firewood. An ogre tribe can subsist on the sacking of a single great caravan for a full month, if not more, and the subsequent feast is often a week-long orgy of food and drink that is heard for miles around. Sadly, these occasions are becoming rare, as the iron rule of trade lord Greasus Goldtooth, the Overtyrant, forces the tribes into a new era of mercenary activity and cooperation with the human race. Slowly but surely, the Ogre Kingdoms have become aware that gold is just as valuable as meat, and far more likely to last the winter.
His guts were gobbled then and there, the rest dragged back to Ogre's lair. Sir Baldwin's heart, so stout and true, took pride of place in wholesome stew. His legs were chewed, his fingers grilled, his lungs with garlic butter filled. Bones were snapped and marrow bled, then powdered into ogre bread. Chainmail fitted ogre's arm, though not with Baldwin's dandy charms. His great sword, once a weapon dire, spitted meat on an open fire. His icon now thrown into the hearth, his breastplate now a goblin's bath. His blanket used to stuff a hole, his skull now a hollow drinking bowl. So then this Bretonian's fate was met upon an ogre's plate. Let ye be warned when eastward bound, pray take some friends, lest ye be found.
Ogres have lived as tribal creatures since their earliest days on the plains. These bands allow ogres to take what they want, whether in battle or on the hunt, as few can stand against a bulky wall of oncoming ogres. A tribe can range in size from a few dozen individuals to larger groups consisting of many hundreds. Yet regardless of an ogre tribe's size, it is organized according to a recognizable hierarchy that follows proud ogre tradition. To ensure their tribe stays strong, any weak or gangly offspring are weeded out by throwing them into caves as offerings to the Great Moor. It is a grim but practical outlook, for ogres require a lot of food, and only those strong enough to hunt or fight can survive. Although this primitive form of eugenics is something they have in common, the Ogre Kingdoms are made up of hundreds of different tribes, and they all have their own ways and violent reputations between them. As ogres are blunt and obvious, the tribal name often reflects the most overt of the tribal traits. For instance, the Skull-Taker tribe have attained prominence for their successful hunts, and the borders of their kingdom are well marked with the skulls of beasts so large they defy belief, while the Treehammers tribe is known for carrying oversized clubs, and the Bloody Fists are recognized by their distinctive war markings made from the blood of their enemies. Each tribe attempts to better its own reputation, a feat most often done in the traditional ogre way, that is, through prodigious acts of violence. For example, the Flesh Greeders, led by their immense tyrant Nogflag the Gouted, would pile everything in a conquered territory that couldn't be carried off or immediately eaten into a single immense mound before erecting a crude throne atop it. Nogflag would climb the pile to sit imperiously atop the throne during the victory feast. Following the festivities, the ogres would stomp off, leaving their enormous monument of destruction behind, clearly marked with their tribal symbols. It was possible to follow the trail of the flesh-greeders when they left the Mountains of Morn, for they left behind them several of these mounds in all the various villages, fortresses and lairs that they dismantled. Regardless of their differing traits, most ogre tribes reside within their own valley in the Mountains of Morn, at least for a time. Ogres rarely spend too long in a single location, a combination of their wanderlust, nomadic heritage, and the general perception that remaining sedentary attracts the ire of their frightful deity. Although never spoken aloud, it is ogre belief that,
if you stay in one place too long, the sky will fall on you.
while in a valley this means travelling between campsites, packing and resetting their great hide-covered huts, digging new moor pits and the like. After a while, however, even this becomes too cramped, and a tyrant will lead his way on a journey, sometimes going far off into the world at large, wreaking as much destruction as they can as they go. Besides their weapons, the ogre tribes typically carry few possessions, and so are ready to move at all times. One of a tribe's most valued items is its moor tooth, a stone that bears the tribe's scrawled marks and sigils. This icon is carried to every location and placed prominently in every new camp, often near the tyrant's hut or in the ring of giant stones that encircle some ogre camps. Ogres see other tribes as competitors for food, and it is best to demonstrate to others that your tribe has larger and more powerful warriors. To this end, ogres constantly engage in highly visible feats of strength, such as climbing sheer cliffs, hurling immense boulders, or pulling hydras out of their rocky dens. Fighting between tribes is common, and usually concludes with the weaker tribe being absorbed by the victor, sometimes literally. Tribes do not always battle, and there are occasions when it is advantageous to work together. For example, when the barbaric men from the north last swept from the Chaos Waste in great numbers, they were repelled by an alliance between the Bloody Fists and the Mountain Eaters. That great victory is still celebrated by the two tribes, who meet yearly to hold a spawn roast. At times, the tribes have been united underneath an Overtyrant, a ruling king that holds power over all the other tyrants. It takes a powerful individual to hold even minor leverage over distant tribes, much less rule over them. But when there is an Overtyrant, it is far more common for multiple tribes to band together to conquer larger territories, vast armies of ogres descending upon the world and smashing aside all opposition to take what they want.
The sun took us to Deep Valley, below the sea of clouds. The world looked small. We could take it and ate it all. Little ones came from the hills, green of skin and useful. They were too stringy to eat, so we put them to work.
Nobblers are a distinct subspecies of alpine goblin that inhabits the mountains, hills, or in recent times the shanty towns of Ogre Kingdoms and the lowlands of Nobbler country, which is to its southern borders. They are similar to their goblin cousins in many ways, such as their cowardice, evil-minded nature, cunning, and their familiar appearance and small stature. Just like their goblin cousins, they are also the slave force of the ogre race, mirroring the way that the goblins, the traditional goblin is the Untermensch of the orc in a traditional greenskin society, acting as servants, cannon fodder, ammunition, or even food. However, ogres tend not to eat nobblers, for they think of them as too stringy. So perhaps they are morally superior to the orc, who is not bent by boundless hunger, but will often eat a goblin. Regardless, these highly unpleasant creatures are possessed of a malicious but limited cunning that entirely fails to make up for their lack of physical strength. Their gnarled bodies are topped with large bulbous heads, and they have scrawny arms that end in wide and dexterous hands. Despite their slender frames, Gnoblars have a disproportionate amount of strength in their legs and backs, having been selectively bred for load-bearing by their master's tendency to tread on those who fail to prove themselves useful. Although small in stature, most Gnoblars have a spiteful, ugly streak a mile long. Most Gnoblars are twisted little cowards whose animal cunning is bent on keeping them alive in a world where everything preys upon them and their own brethren view them as a threat to their position. Many go out of their way to lure animals and even other humanoids near the ogre camps, where they can drag the injured away to kill slowly. When they do have something at their mercy, it's not very pleasant at all. Ogres sometimes torture prisoners to work up an appetite, but their great strength, hunger, or plain boredom can often end the torment early for their victims. Gnoblars, however, torture living things not only just for the fun of it, but of the sense of the power that it gives them, which is highly addictive to such a race as the Gnoblar. It's so rare for a Gnoblar to have an intelligent being at their mercy, something that they have outwitted or outcompeted in some way, for other Gnoblars don't count. For this is so rare, they drag out the process for as long as possible, often feeling betrayed by the poor victim when they finally expire and cheat them of their sport. Gnoblar whelps often gang together to torture small mammals like bristle hogs and rats, and occasionally even the smallest of their group if they think they can get away with it. The majority of Gnoblar sports are simply ritualized methods of chasing, tormenting, and torturing other creatures. The most remarkable feature of a Gnoblar is probably his nose, a massive, protuberant lump that can smell an approaching predator before it has a chance to pounce. This is complemented by an acute pair of ears, large triangular appendages that swivel independently at the slightest sound. A Gnoblar down on his luck will have them perked up expectantly, perhaps to make himself larger and more threatening. However, the Gnoblars found out a long time ago that the best way to make themselves look larger and more threatening is simply to stand between the legs of a well-fed ogre. Despite the fact that there is very little meat on a Gnoblar, they are preyed upon by all and sundry. They are often enslaved by Chaos Dwarf raiders, of whom they are deathly afraid, and not without good reason. The most important step in Gnoblar evolution, or at least this is the common theory among scholars, was the realization that the ogres dwelling in the mountains of Morn found them of more use as slaves than sustenance. Before long, a mass exodus of Gnoblars leaving their homelands in the foothills saw the Ogre Kingdoms infested, with shanty towns springing up in every available nook and cranny. Since that day, the Gnoblars have performed the menial tasks demanded of them by their ogre masters, and in return, the ogres ensure that only a comparatively small percentage of Gnoblars meet a grisly and unfortunate death. When a Gnoblar is claimed by an ogre, perhaps after offering a tankard of beer, or a dead sibling to a prospective master at exactly the right time, that Gnoblar is then earmarked. This involves biting off a portion of the Gnoblar's ear so that the ogre's distinctive bite mark is left as a permanent sign of ownership, far quicker and simpler than branding. An earmarked Gnoblar is theoretically above the constant bickering and infighting that characterizes this species. The fortunate few dress in cast-off pieces of clothing taken from the corpses of the ogre's victims, and even accompany their masters into the field of battle, either at their side or in bickering mobs that pelt their enemies with anything sharp that they can lay their light-fingered hands on. There is an old ogre expression,
I wouldn't trust a nobbler save as far as I could throw him,
which has its roots in the traditional ogre practice of hurling a potential nobbler servant to check his worth. Varying quite dramatically in size, the larger nobblers tend to be independent, even rebellious at times, and they cannot be thrown nearly as far should the ogre wish to participate in a nobbler hurling contest, which is a blossoming sport in the ogre kingdoms. Small nobblers, in fact, are prized not only because they tend to be more subservient, but having adapted to this role of the Untermensch most proficiently, but also because they can be strapped to a stout branch and passed over the shoulder, scratching those hard-to-reach places with sharp, scrabbling claws. It is common for an ogre to develop a twisted affection for his prized nobbler servant, boasting to his tribe mates that his nobbler is a good little runner with a healthy green hide and a particularly droopy nose. Unfortunately, the more often a pet nobbler is around his master, the higher the chance he will be eaten or simply crushed in an accident. Almost every ogre has a nobbler to call his own, and they often echo the characteristics of their master in a strange Stockholm Syndrome-inspired mimicry. A nobbler belonging to a tyrant will likely be a bullying little tyke with an ill-fitting helmet, whereas one belonging to a leadbelcher might have a soot-blackened face and a rag in each earhole. It is possible to tell a lot about an ogre by the nobblers he keeps. Nobbler society and status is a complex, many-layered thing that changes constantly. There are two measures of a nobbler's status: physical appearance and his place within society. As with their masters, the larger nobblers tend to rise to the top of the heap. Overall size, however, is seen as secondary to ear and to a lesser extent nose size. Just as in some societies a long beard or old age is seen to signify wisdom, in nobbler society large floppy ears and a huge nose are seen to signify authority and importance. A nobbler with large ears and nose is superior in his own mind to those around him, and will naturally try to take charge at every opportunity. This can lead to endless bickering, as most nobblers have an overinflated view of their size and the size of their own ears. The biggest, meanest nobblers are not always those with the largest ears and noses, but however large and tough a nobbler is, he will always feel inadequate and lacking in authority if his ears aren't particularly big. Some even go mad with paranoia, thinking everyone is snickering about their small ears behind their back, which of course they are. Ear and nose size is also the subject of great competition between all nobblers, with even the lowliest scum carefully memorizing the relative sizes of everyone in their neighbourhood, and having nothing but contempt for those who compare unfavourably with him. As with everything else, nobblers try to cheat with ear and nose size, and no end of dubious schemes are hatched to stretch, grow, or even fake them. This usually results in injury and ridicule, but occasionally something works and the lucky nobbler shoots up the social ladder. Some may even be bold or stupid enough to beg their tribe's butcher for help. This is unwise, as though the butchers often stick to their word and find ways of making the nose and ears swell. The nobbler concerned is very lucky if they live to regret it. House baiting. The grand nobbler tradition of house baiting was supposed to have been started by Oda's Cleanfinger, who, after being beaten senseless by 3 of the biggest nobblers in his shantytown, managed to trick his oppressors into thinking that the tyrant would let nobblers, as distinguished as they, put their hovels up next to his yurt. Not wasting any time, odors ratted on them as soon as they did this, and the tyrant is said to have thrown the squashed remains of the offending tents and nobblers over 100 feet, clean out of the camp. Later that day, as the story goes, Odors was captured and literally eaten alive by his cousins, who thought his warm brain would bestow great cunning on all who ate it. Even to this day, scrap merchants try to sell shriveled up bits of badger or weasel brain as the remains of the great clean finger. Runt Sprint. One of the more cruel nobbler sports is Runt Sprint. It was originated by ogres when nobblers first joined their camps, and is now a firm favourite with nobblers and ogres alike. Runt Sprint is usually a game where someone runs around a specific track, and sometimes even within the moor pit itself. The only real requirements for a Runt Sprint track are that there are plenty of spectators there to watch at once without having to move around, and that there are lots of dangerous obstacles. Originally, the ogres would round up the injured or weak nobblers and throw them on the track. All but the winner will be eaten, so with nothing to lose, the unfortunates are forced to run over dangerous obstacles as fast as they can. These days, the nobblers hunt their own injured down for the games. Nobbler Bowl. Nobbler Bowl is a regular event on feast days, and its place in both ogre and nobbler culture is a testament to the relationship between the two races. Its roots lie in a traditional ogre children's game called runt baiting. Young ogres who are being bored sometimes amuse themselves by throwing bits of worn-out clothes and worthless coins in the middle of a pack of slaves of lesser species. This works particularly well with nobblers, and a violent brawl quickly ensues as they all pile on by trying to bite and kick their way to the treasures and carry off the best. No adult ogre ever really grows out of enjoying runt baiting, and this innocent childhood game has grown into a very popular sport. Nobbler Bowl is normally held on feast days and requires some kind of pit or arena. Somewhere between 10 and 40 nobbler volunteers wait eagerly at the edges of the gaming ground, while the ogres arrive full and content from the feast and relax themselves with a drink around the arena. When the go-ahead is given, usually by a tyrant, a bruiser, or one of the iron guts, some shiny and vaguely valuable items are thrown into the arena, and the nobblers leap in after them. Any item a nobbler can drag or carry to the edge of the arena, they get to keep, including bits of injured opponents. Betting on who will come away with what, and who will even survive, is popular, and most bulls will be bellowing drunkenly at someone they've bet on or against. Threats such as,
"Get the broken helmet, you short-nosed piece of fang weasel dung,"
or
"Smash your parts to jelly if you don't get the ripskirt out the helmet,"
or even,
"Ripskirt, drop dead now or I'll squash you myself. I have money on you dead,"
are all common calls. The obscene chants or songs are popular. However, it is considered bad sportsmanship for an ogre to physically intervene. Throwing bits of food or even nobblers into the arena is usually tolerated, but sometimes a particularly drunk or angry bull will stagger into the arena and discipline a nobbler that has cost them money. This is fairly rare though, because as well as committing a social blunder, an ogre that interferes in a game of Nobbler Bowl is likely to upset the bets of other ogres, and ogres are notoriously direct at expressing their displeasure, as you can imagine. Nobbler Bowl is also highly popular with nobblers. A large percentage of the population will beg, steal, or even work to get permission to watch. Its popularity is even starting to eclipse more traditional sports like nose-ripping. Pig jousting is one of the most extreme, bizarre and chaotic games. Pig jousting, a common and confusing sight in most camps. Groups of shrilly screaming nobblers charge around on squealing pigs, tussling with each other as they pass. and often continuing to run around screaming after they are unseated. However, among the more organised nobler tribes, a more advanced version has emerged, which ogres sometimes watch. In this variation, which undoubtedly gave pig jousting its name, two nobblers face each other across a cleared pit, sat atop their pigs, dressed in much protection as they muster, and armed with long pointy sticks. When the order to charge is given, they both charge forward and try to unseat their opponents. These imitations of human knights rapidly descend into chaos as the pigs run around wildly. The nobblers lose their poles. Impatient knights charge in to join battle early, and angry ogres start throwing anything that comes to hand at the useless competitors.
Alright, mate. Well, if I can't convince you to not go to the fucking mountains of Morn after the stories I've told you, then I guess I can't. Okay? You're still a stupid cunt though, but I suppose I'll stop trying to stop you. If you are going to go though, there are some things I can tell you that might give you an edge over there, stop yourself getting fucking eaten by a massive old bastard. I know a few of the ogre tribes. I'm going to go through them with you. This might save your head one day. You see, they're all split up. It's not just one kingdom ruled by one who controls everything. It's lots of little tribes together. Now, I know a few of them from when I was there. This isn't all of them, but it might stop you from dying. Alright, here's the Gold-Tooth Tribe. They're one of the major factions of the Ogre Kingdoms. Since the days of the infamous tyrant Gothug, the Gold-Tooth Ogres have gained notoriety as the wealthiest of all the tribes. Now, under the rule of Greasus Gold-Tooth, the Gold-Tooth Tribe has grown yet richer. Ever eager to show off their top status, the tribe is given to ostentatious displays, from a vast mountain-top feast hall to their solid gold moor-tooth. The Gold-Tooths boast legions of iron guts, who are renowned for the precious metals and gemstones worked into their armour and gut plates, and naturally have at least one of their teeth replaced with a gold one. Most other tribes have learned the hard way that it is best not to mess with them Gold-Tooths. All ogres cut a brutal path of devastation when they cross the land, which is why I don't know why you want to fucking go there, but none have earned a greater reputation for smashing and grabbing than the Thunderguts tribe, alright? Occasionally the Thunderguts try to hold an enemy town or stronghold for ransom, extorting them so that they might hand over long strings of livestock to the ogres. However, such plans continually fail. The over-greedy tribe proves either too impatient to wait for their ransom, or they simply eat their payment and then renege on their pledge not to attack. Many are the empire towns and orc forts that were levelled soon after they thought their freedom was bought with meat. Having recently returned to the mountains of Morn from a long journey into the Badlands and beyond, it can only be a matter of time before the tribe moves on again. The Crossed Clubs are a tribe within the Ogre Kingdoms known for its mercenaries and outlandish fibbery. Every tribe produces man-eaters, those far-ranging ogres who have fought in many lands. The Crossed Clubs tribe, however, is infamous not only for the sheer number of its ogres who have fought as mercenaries, but also for the prodigious lies the veteran can shovel out, making much of their
renown dubious at best. While many ogres bear battle scars, the presence of so many hard-fighting veterans in the crossed clubs ensure the tribe is full of ogres with hook hands, eye patches, peg legs and the like. Add to this the outlandish war gear collected from the four corners of the world, such as burkas from Araby, shell-tipped clubs from the coasts, or enormous lizard skull helmets from the Southlands, and the crossed clubs are surprisingly one of the most disparate and unusual looking of all ogre tribes. The Sons of the Mountain tribe is one of the major groups found within the Ogre Kingdoms, famous for hunting alongside yetis. While most tribes prefer to stake their camps in the valleys of the Mountains of Morn, the Sons of the Mountain take great pride in residing near the top of the Tusk, a particularly high peak on the borders of the ancient giant lands. There, the tribe has grown famous for hunting the many beasts that live in the mountains, and their trade in ivory has made them rich indeed. The Sons of the Mountain wear distinctive white war paint, as they claim that it better camouflages them in the eternal snow of the mountain top. Usually many yetis and other mountain-dwelling monsters reside with the Sons of the Mountain, and the ogres themselves seem to share an affinity with these creatures, even going so far as to hunt with the yetis in the wilds. The well-fed lowlanders of the Feastmaster tribe are famous for two things: the quality of their food and the halflings that live amongst them. Their heavily jowled tyrant, Blout Feastmaster, is a real fat cunt, captured a string of the small folk during his many travels, and in display of foresight and extreme self-control for a fucking ogre, brought them home for the lads instead of eating them then and there. The halflings, in perpetual fear of ending up in the trough, fulfill much of the same role as noblars, but in addition to fetching, they also help to prepare the food. As long as they keep making top-notch meals, the halflings won't end up being a light snack themselves. Probably. The rock skulls are amongst the toughest of all ogre tribes. Each year at the Great Feast, it is inevitably a rock skull who wins the boulder butting contests, where ogres try to split the most enormous of rocks using only their heads. Coincidentally, the rock skulls are also amongst the most dim-witted of ogres, and they have been tricked or swindled a great many times over by many, many opponents. Skarsnik, the night goblin warlord of Eight Peaks, notoriously hired a large contingent of rock skull mercenaries to fight in his battles against the dwarfs. After being thoroughly bewildered during the contract talks, the rock skull leader ended up paying Skarsnik for the honour of aiding the greenskins. Led by burly tyrant Bull Mallet Hands, the Blood Guzzlers tribe rules the Vale of Webs in the middle of the northern region of the Mountains of Morn, having settled in a valley notoriously haunted by enormous spiders. The ogres have become expert arachnid hunters. The Blood Guzzler butchers brag that they can roast, de-leg and devour even the largest of spiders in mere moments, and the huge piles of many segmented legs and empty exoskeletons that are left after a typical Blood Guzzler's feast attest to that skill. The Iron Skin ogres are a fierce lot, known for their hard-hitting charges and their penchant for black iron gut plates. The tribe's speciality is to launch massive avalanche-like attacks on their foes, smashing into them in a single sweeping crush. During such assaults, they always seek to grab as many prisoners as they can, and then march quickly home to their deep valley in the northwestern range of the Mountains of Morn. So prodigious and successful are these attacks that the Ironskin tribe has thus established strong ties to the citadel of Tsar Nagrund, whom they trade with to obtain their armour, and as rumours have it, the great mechanical beast ridden by their tyrant, Gark Ironskin. The Lazars, known previously as the Lazars, are one of the oldest ogre tribes, being descended from the first prophet of the Great Moor, Groth Onefinger himself. Living on the southeastern edge of the ancient giant lands, the Lazars are now twisted and malformed creatures, choosing to wrap themselves in filthy sackcloth to avoid the unhealthy winds that still sweep off the desolate wastes that used to be the ogre homeland. Many tribe members begin to lose their teeth to the debilitating energies of that strange land, but the Lazars simply hammer black rock directly into their ravaged gums, lending them a distinctly horrifying appearance. Theirs is the last valley on the road leading to the moor itself, and the tolling bells that hang from the totems marking their territory haunt all the ogres that pass through the fetid site on pilgrimages to visit their unforgiving god. One of the many horrors of the Dark Lands, the Eyebiter Tribe dominates the region around the Sentinels, the great rocks that tower over the crossroads where the Silver Road, Spice Route and Ivory Road meet in the howling wastes. There, in addition to the heavy tithing the waypost traders set up in shanties burrowed into the great rocks, they range out to capture slaves, smash any settlements they can find, and to hunt the dreary plains for the many foul monsters that live there. The Eyebiters are a close-knit tribe ruled by Malron Eyebiter, a long-lived tyrant who has sired more strong sons and grandsons than any other ogre alive. Based on what I know of ogre tribes, that means that he's gonna fucking die. The hulking tyrant Baldig Mountain Eater is the kind of ogre of which legends are made. Baldig has sought out and conquered many of the most menacing peaks found in the Mountains of Morn, including the much-dreaded Mount Thug. He has defeated them all and even, it is said, toppled Big Stride Peak when he burrowed under it and ate the heart of the mountain. Naturally drawn to such a tough and charismatic leader, the growing Mountain Eater tribe imitates Baldig by eating rocks with every meal so that they can become as tough and stubborn as their tyrant. Often underground, the Mountain Eaters have developed a taste for the races they habitually find there, actually preferring dwarf, skaven or night goblin meat to all other.
Hack, grind, cook, and eat. Those butchers are all right. Don't get near their pots, though.
Ogre butchers are second only to tyrants in terms of power and influence, for they are not only the spiritual and magical representative of their tribe and god, but they are also the tribe's foremost cooks, which has an extra station in ogre society. Through the gory ritual preparation and consumption of meat, butchers channel a portion of their fearsome deity's eternal hunger into feats of magic. Invoking the single-minded strength of their god, butchers can instill unnatural vitality to their comrades, swelling the ogre's muscles and toughening their skin. They can even turn their wrath upon the enemy, causing bones to break or the ground to open up and swallow their foes. Although not as mighty as a tyrant, a butcher is an emissary of the Great Moor and is held in both awe and fear by his tribe. Butchers prepare all of a tribe's feasts, celebrations in which all ogres take great pride. Around a camp, a butcher is given a wide berth, for it is best not to get too close in case he is looking for extra ingredients, as fingers or whole limbs have been known to go missing. In battle, however, butchers are most often found right in the thick of the fighting, where they use their cleavers and magic to great effect. Butchers are typically more rotund than the average ogre, and have even worse personal hygiene. They often resemble walking larders, for in addition to being caked in dried blood and offal, butchers adorn themselves with chunks of meat, along with an array of meat hooks, cleavers, filleting knives, and even special tenderizers tucked into a leather apron, or even pierced through their flabby skin. A butcher must be prepared to use these items in all their gore-soaked rituals at a moment's notice. Of all true ogres, only butchers do not wear a gut plate. They trust their guts to the protection of the Great Maw. Any infant that conforms to the recognized portents is immediately handed to the tribe's butcher, who bites deep into the whelp's gut to claim it as his own. The butcher then force-feeds the child in a continual glut until the protege has grown fat and strong. Further intonations to the secrets of the Great Maw include gulping down rotten meat and toxins to build a tolerance to poison, learning the art of grinding bones to meal, and discovering which parts of a beast to devour to augment different magics. Butchers are responsible for blessing their tribal warriors with the power of the Great Maw itself, as well as inflicting great harm to those who dare to stand before them. Some butchers show an inclination towards magics other than the Great Maw. Some take powers from the very animals they cull, while those who dream of an oncoming fiery comet have a penchant for reading the future and controlling the weather in destructive ways, whilst always looking to the heavens for some skyborne disaster. Still other butchers revel in the final act of their killing work, and their spells focus on death and dying. Regardless of their focus, ogres believe that to cross a butcher is to cross the Great Maw itself, a certain recipe for painful doom. Ogre slaughtermasters are the most senior-ranking butchers within the tribe, immense, corpulent hulks covered in offal of dried blood. They have appalling personal hygiene, and love nothing more than to wallow themselves in meat, guts, and blood, regardless of its source. Hideous and mean, butchers are essentially the ogre equivalent of a tribal shaman, yet their role is more that of a holy man than a magic user. They have a direct link to the Great Maw, and channel a portion of this deity into a practice known as gut magic. During induction into the cult of the Great Maw, these slaughtermasters are taught how to tame fire. As firemaster, shaman, and head chef, slaughtermasters wield a large amount of influence within each ogre kingdom, second only to the tyrant himself. Twinned with their malign intellect, it is not uncommon for the hoarse whispers of a tribe's slaughtermaster to dictate the bellowed commands of his tyrant.
It was you, Gilmog. It was you who brought the Emperor's wrath upon us. It was you who first tasted the flesh of the little ones. It was you who led the rest of our warriors to feast upon the soft meat out in the rice fields. You deceived them all. Now you cannot satisfy your hunger, even when you devour the bodies of your own kin. It is too late. We all know it. We can all feel that craven hunger inside us now. You've infected all of the ogre kin with your greed, and created something far greater and more terrifying out there in the wastelands. I know this to be true, because I've seen it for myself.
Groth Onefinger was the first ogre butcher, holding the first feast on the lip of the Great Maw itself, and being the first of his prophets. Groth was born as the son of the greatest chieftain of the ogre tribes, the famed Rothog of the Lazar tribe. Yet as a pup, he was troubled with dark visions of the inevitable downfall of ogre kind at large. According to legend, when Groth's father returned from the far north as a mercenary of Cathay, during the War of the Black Lotus. He and his band of mercenaries made their long trek back home, taking supplies of food from the peasants they passed, unconsensually. When they returned to their camp to receive their pay from the Imperial Army of Cathay, they found it devoid of the living, save for Groth, who stood impassive, even as his father and his brethren demanded an answer for his wanton killing. He gave no real answer, save for a warning to his father, before the old chieftain died of a sudden heart attack, mere moments after Groth slowly walked away into the distance. Considered a madman due to his insistence that the coming of the ogre god was near, he was severely wounded in the cataclysm that proved him irrefutably correct. Groth was horribly burned by the resultant firestorm, losing his nose, eyelids, lips, ears, and all bar one of his digits to the searing flames. But Groth rose again like a hideous phoenix, blackened, wide-eyed, and utterly convinced that his god had come to earth. With unholy fervour, Groth tracked down his old tribe, the Lazars, and confronted the new chieftain, a large ogre called Gilmog, who was part of his father's mercenary company. No one knew except Groth that it was Gilmog who brought the horrors of the Great Moor upon their race. When the band tried to extort supplies from the Cathayan peasants, it was Gilmog who was the first of the ogres to taste the tender meat of child flesh. That incident sealed the fate of the ogres, as the fate of the eaten children came to the ears of the celestial emperor. Gilmog, seeing the truth of his words, was helplessly frightened at the revelation, even as his former tribe began to encircle him and eat him whole. Instilled with faith, Groth led the survivors of his tribe across the vitrified sands towards the impact crater. They battled thirst, hunger, and despair, keeping their spirits high by eating the weaker members of the tribe on the way, until they set eyes on the Great Moor. Momentarily sated, after devouring several thousand of his kin, it let Groth and his kin live. Groth became the first butcher of the ogres, slaughtering several of his kin and holding a cannibalistic feast right on the lip of the moor itself. His name is still praised by butchers across the ogre kingdoms, many of who still ritually burn themselves in honor of the first great prophet. His descendants, the Lazars, still live on the outskirts of the desolate wastes that used to be the ogre homelands, and are twisted and malformed creatures, permanently wrapped in filthy sackcloth, with chains and piercings studding into their flesh. They regard the Great Moor as their tyrant, and the sound of their bells haunts the passes that lead to the moor itself, that many ogres journey through on a pilgrimage to meet the Great Moor.
Please, like and subscribe, follow. Ooh.
In the north of the mountains of Morn is the Ironskin tribe, a kingdom of ogres with unparalleled ties to the citadel of Tsar Nagrund. This tribe valued iron more than gold long before they began to trade with the Chaos Dwarfs, and typically wear black iron gut plates, have metal teeth, and mix iron filings into their war paint. It is a mark of status for an Ironskin ogre to cover himself with iron, rather than mere trinkets such as gold. After all, gold is soft and beautiful, a woman's metal, whereas iron is tough, strong, and ugly, like an ogre bull. The Ironskin tribe believes that where an ogre can gain much in trade from gold, A stout iron club can cut out all that confusing haggling and get straight to the good stuff. The Ironskin Ogres are a fierce lot, known for their hard-hitting charges. The tribe's speciality is to launch massive avalanche-like attacks onto their foes, smashing into them in a single sweeping crush. During such assaults, they always seek to grab as many prisoners as they can, and then march them quickly home to their deep valley in the northwestern range of the Mountains of Morn. So prodigious and successful are these attacks that the Ironskin tribe has thus established strong ties to the citadel of Zarnagrund, whom they trade with to obtain their armor. With scores of lead belchers in their ranks, even the Ironskin bulls adorn themselves with as much metal as they can. But it is their tyrant, Gark Ironskin, himself, who is responsible for the tribe's fearsome reputation. Having traded slaves for decades with his Chaos Dwarf allies, Gark rides to war in a massive fitted suit of plate mail with great curving horns, seated atop a hissing mechanical rhinox that some whisper is possessed of a demonic sentience. Gark Ironskin is very unusual. He was smashed over the top of his head by his father for eating too loudly while still a whelp, and one of the nails of his father's iron-bound club broke off in Gark's head where it rusts to this day. The longest serving of his Iron Gut bodyguard claimed that this may be the reason for Gark's obsession with metal, a passion that has spread throughout his tribe. Gark is famous in the Ogre Kingdoms for another reason. His tribe boasts a great number of Rhinox riders. The very first ogre to batter a bull Rhinox into submission was Gark. He tamed his one-time steed Bladehorn with an iron stanchion. To this day, Ironskin bulls take pride in repeating the coming-of-age feat of their tyrant, though it is a closely guarded secret of the Ironskin clan that it is much easier to tame a wild Rhinox with iron than with wood. Gark's obsession with metal is undoubtedly the foundation of this long-standing alliance with his neighbours, the Chaos Dwarfs of Zarnagrund. Gark has provided the Chaos Dwarfs with many hundreds of nobler slaves over the years, and much of the gold that passes through his realm. This alliance proved invaluable when, after slaughtering his way through the majority of an army of Bretonnian knights errant, Gark's Rhinox Bladehorn was spitted upon the lances of a unit of Grail knights. Gark never forgave them, even after he had them for dinner later that day, and fragments of their armor still adorn Gark's own plate mail. But it was the Chaos Dwarfs who were really responsible for Gark's current infamy. They replaced their allies' Rhinox with a mechanical monstrosity of hissing pistons and rune-etched chains, a demon-fueled engine of destruction that obeys Gark's every command, although he still bashes it over the head every now and again for old time's sake. None can doubt that Gark Ironskin is amongst the mightiest of tyrants, riding his unstoppable steed at the head of an ironclad army of bulls and Rhinox riders, the ground shaking at their tread. The origins of the famous Iron Blaster cannon are comparatively recent, and make for a popular tale around the campfires of the Ogre Kingdoms. The Ironskin tribe, famous for their love of metal and the sheer number of cannon-toting madmen in their ranks, held a contest to see who could unleash the most destruction during the Great Nobler Purge of 2211 IC. Amongst their number was Bograt Sevenbellies, an ogre possessed of such physical strength as well as sheer girth, and an eye for an opportunity. He left the contest with a wild gleam in his eye, and began the long climb into the mountains, eventually reaching the tumble-down ruins that were once the majestic castles of the Sky Titans. Bograt remembered seeing something when, a few decades back, when he had a mere 3 bellies to his name, he had prowled the debris as a youth. Searching through the rubble, Bograt unearthed a massive bronze cylinder covered in elaborate friezes that depicted the war in the sky, like unto a lead-belcher gun, or one of the Thinling's cannons, but far larger. This was one of the castle-mounted guns the Sky Titans used towards the end of their war against the ogres all those years ago, and Bograt believed it was high time such weapons were put back into use. Taming a nearby rhinox with repeated blows of his club, Bograt strapped the immense cannon to his new pet, and sent it down the mountainside, sat astride the enormous bronze cylinder, content to let gravity do most of the work. Rather more quickly than he anticipated, Bograt returned to his tribe, covered in glory and bruises, the bronze cannon intact. It did not take long for the tribe to catch on to what Bograt had in mind. The tribe pooled all its remaining black powder, and priming the great cannon, loaded cannonball after cannonball into its cavernous maw until it was full to the brim. The enormous gun, which by now had been mounted on a ramshackle chassis and probably secured to the captive rhinoc, was taken to the main entrance of the Nobler tunnel town and wedged into the passageway's mouth. Bograt was given the honor of setting light to the fuse. Within one blinding, deafening second, the Nobler infestation was no more. The shower of green limbs that erupted from dozens of hidden bolt holes provided much amusement, and formed a deliciously smoky appetizer for the iron-skinned tribe before they headed back for a proper celebration. Pleased to get rid of the Nobblers, even if it was only for a little while before new ones crept in, the tyrant allowed Bograt to sit beside him during his feast. Since that famous day, many ogres from the Iron-Skin tribe have climbed high into the mountains of the ancient giant lands in order to secure more of the Sky Titan's old artillery. It didn't take long for the Iron Blaster to be seen and coveted by the other tyrants of the Ogre Kingdoms. Now many tribes can boast of several Iron Blasters, the great weapon wagons usually being crewed by the largest and richest lead-belcher in each tribe. When deployed in battle, the Iron Blaster is hauled into a good shooting position before blasting out a fiery tongue of flame and thunderous boom. The multiple cannonballs are able to tear apart a whole regiment in a maelstrom of noise and violence, especially should the Iron Blaster get in close. The advantage of getting close is that, with the right encouragement and a few stiff prods, the rhinox can strain enough to really get the Iron Blaster wagon moving quickly. Something that large with so much momentum can really pack a wallop when it hits. If the sheer impact doesn't smash the foe, perhaps the ogre's blows or the gouging horns of the rhinox can finish the job. When things go wrong for an Iron Blaster, however, they go very badly indeed. It can be safely said that the ogres do not make the canniest of artillerymen, overloading, underloading, touching flame to the spark hole too soon, or just plain joyriding, too enthralled with the opportunity to ride in a pulled wagon and fire the largest cannon imaginable. Still, the giant cannons were forged to last, so even after the most horrific of accidents, it is never long before a new chassis is constructed, a new lead-belcher found to crew the mighty gun, and the cycle of violence begun anew.
Amidst the constant warfare of the ogres, one battle stands out, a defining moment where a conglomerate of tribes was forged into a mighty nation whose tread shakes the world. The Battle of the Fire Mouth not only galvanized the Ogre Kingdoms, but also roused their dormant volcano god.
It began with a great Black Orc invasion. Since the days when they first escaped the enslavement of the Chaos Dwarfs, many Black Orcs have settled in the Mountains of Morn. Since that ancient time, Ogres and Black Orcs have fought many battles. But for their brawn, the Ogres can never fully extradite the Orcs from their midst, and so it has gone, back and forth, for over 2,000 years, both sides grown to respect their foes' fighting prowess. Urk Ironskull rose quickly to become the greatest Black Orc war boss of the Mountains of Morn. Under his rule, the Black Orcs expanded further than ever, pushing far out from their stronghold of Mount Black Fang. Urk understood how to defeat ogres, and he destroyed many tribes. As Urk Ironskull's onslaught gained momentum, it swelled into a war, an invasion that attracted greenskins from all over, including many wolf riders from the tribes of the Darklands, and night goblins from Mount Greyhag. With each new battle, Urk's legions grew, and the disjointed ogres could not hope to stand against the overwhelming greenskin attacks. At the time, Greasus Goldtooth had only recently claimed the title of Overtyrant, the ruler of all the ogre tribes. While he dominated the kingdoms nearest to his own, more distant tribes, particularly those of the north, were not yet convinced of Greasus' right to rule. Greasus had performed feats of strength that carried his name across the ogre kingdoms, slaying the great ice drake, Jaugrul, earning him the name Drake Crush, breaking open the stone gates of a dwarf mine, hence the moniker Gate Crasher, and eating an entire herd of gruntelope, earning indigestion, as it was simply too many hooves in one go, but he had never fully gathered the ogres under his command. When Greasus heard of Urk Ironskull's army, he knew it was the challenge that he had been seeking. If he could crush the Black Orc invasion, none could fail to recognize his greatness or dispute his title. The voluminous Overtyrant travelled to many valleys to gather support. Under his demand, the ogre tribes all along the Ivory Road and as far south as Noblar country answered his summons, until an army of the like of which the world had never seen was assembled. So great was the ogre host that the valleys squeaked and quaked as Greasus led the host north. Urk Ironskull had not been idle. More tyrants had fallen before him as he penetrated deeply into the Mountains of Morn. When word of the new Overtyrant and his coalition reached Urk, he planned to confront them at the place of his choosing. With his vast horde surrounding him, Urk Ironskull assailed the Firemouth, driving off the strange, flame-breathing ogres that ruled there, and planting his war trophies in the slopes of that smoking volcano. Urk knew that this was his chance to wrest control of the entire territory, and he planned to deliver the ogres' defeat while standing upon their living god, so that the brutes would know true fear. Urk Ironskull reckoned the simple bull-rush tactics of the ogres would lead them straight into his trap, attacking up a steep slope against superior numbers. The ogre surge would bog down against the sea-like mass of goblins. Urk held little regard for the goblins' fighting ability, but their great quantity would slow down his foes and buy time for the jaws of his trap to close. Massed orcs stood ready to close onto either ogre flank, while Urk unleashed his death blow, an assault by legions of armour-clad black orcs, who would charge downhill into the weary ogres. To amuse himself while he waited, Urk ordered his last prisoners thrown into the hissing lava pools of the volcano. Urk had correctly judged the hot anger of the ogres upon seeing the great Firemouth occupied by a mocking foe. Yet for all Urk's cunning, the war boss underestimated the iron rule of the Overtyrant. Urk was used to fighting disparate ogre tribes, not a vast host fighting as a single army. After a forced march, the ogres entered the blackened valley, and in the early light of dawn they saw orcs and their trophies upon their volcanic deity, and each tyrant rushed to be the first to storm the slopes. No other ogre save Greasus Goldtooth could have halted that charge, and yet by bellowing orders that shook the valley, he managed to still the battle-hungry tribes. With a signal, Greasus called for the tyrants to gather for an impromptu war council. The pride of each tribe stepped forward, yet each leader was dwarfed beneath the colossal Overtyrant. Greasus recognized the trap that the Black Orcs had set, yet he was not of a mind to back down. If Ironskall wanted to charge down the Firemouth and surround the ogres, then so much the better. It would save a lot of marching. Aiming to teach the orcs not to bite off more than they could chew, Greasus told the assembled tyrants his battle plan. Several tyrants scratched their heads, but most grasped the brutal potential. Once the new formations were assembled, all were impressed with the Overtyrant's plan. The crux of Greasus's plan was for the great war beasts and Mournfang cavalry that accompanied each tribe to be massed into a single wedge at the front of the battle line. As there were scores of different ogre tribes, the monstrous herd was quite large, containing stonehorns, thunder tusks, and other beasts from that primordial land of ice and snow. Behind the formidable front rode a phalanx of Mournfang cavalry, followed by the rest of the ogres. Although Ironskall had prepared his minions for the ogre onrush, what surged up the volcano slopes was nothing like the greenskins had encountered before. The ground shook at their approach, and the unmissable rumblings of Firemouth were heard, the great volcano stirring as if in approval. The living wall of beasts stampeding towards them panicked the swathes of goblins, who at best loosed a few volleys of arrows before fleeing. Urk's plan of wearing down the ogre impetus began to look shaky, but he still had hopes of his second wave, the large mobs of night goblins. As the monstrous herd churned up the mountain, dozens of mushroom-drugged loonies were launched out of the black-clad masses, each whirling a heavy iron ball. The shaggy beasts did not pause, stamping the fanatics underfoot and routing the night goblins utterly. Without breaking stride, the hulking creatures and gore-splattered Mournfang cavalry crashed into the Black Orcs beyond. Despite the onslaught, the Black Orcs held, although a third of their number were flattened in the charge. Using great axes, the Black Orcs chopped furiously, hacking out trunk-like legs so that some beasts stumbled back down the steep slopes, crushing a path through the oncoming ogres. Although they had halted the stampede and were destroying it, the Black Orcs were pinned in place and could not fulfill Urk's plan by joining the rest of the army as it closed on the onrushing ogres. Further down the slope, the jaws of the greenskin trap closed, the orcs outnumbering the ogres by more than 6 to 1. Had the Black Orc centre been able to join the assault, then it may have been all over. As it was, the ogres were still hard-pressed. Amidst the fury of the great bloodletting, the Firemouth itself spoke, shaking the ground and sending thick plumes of smoke skyward. The midday sun was obscured behind falling ash, and the slopes were eerily lit by glowing streams of lava or the occasional flame gouts spouted by ogre firebellies, priests of the Firemouth, who had eagerly joined Greasus for the fight. Despite the press of greenskins, the ogres dug in their heels and were starting to push back when the momentum shifted again. Having brought down the last of the great beasts near the summit, Urk and his Black Orcs at last joined the main fray. Their charge smashed into the ogres, and it was only the incomparable will of Greasus Goldtooth that held the ogres in place. The ogres gave ground, consolidating into a knot of resistance. The ogre centre remained rock solid, for there Greasus fought himself, surrounded by his bodyguard of iron guts. The bedrock of the ogre line, Urk realized that to break the resistance, he must break its heart. The most hardened veterans on either side pounded at each other, giving all they could, Double-handed club strikes crumpled the Black Orcs, while the great choppers of the greenskins cracked gut plates and were embedded deep in rotund bellies. It was here, in the slaughter-filled epicenter, that the battle would be decided, and both commanders knew it, for they personally pushed to the front, carving paths of carnage as they came. Around their leaders, the two armies fought like pairs of raging cave beasts, locking horns atop a mountain peak and heaving with all their might. Disemboweled ogres strove to smash one last greenskin even while their guts coiled from gaping wounds. Black Orcs, their helmets caved in, and leaking brain matter fought to deliver one more axe blow. Greaser swung his diamond-studded scepter in sweeping arcs that smashed aside ranks of Black Orcs at a time. A grand uppercut from Greasus's club-like scepter caught Urk's personal banner-bearer, snapping his totem and sending the Black Orc flying upwards. It was a prodigious shot of heroic proportions, and for a moment the battered body seemed to hang in the air above the rim of the volcano before plummeting into the coiling smoke. Surviving ogres still talk of the distance and height of that majestic blow. Seeing Iron Skull's banner pole snapped, and its bearer sent skyward, the greenskin battle line wavered. Howling in rage, Urk sliced his way through a wall of iron guts to stand before Greasus in the slopes of the Firemouth. It was his battle to win, and no ogre was going to stop him. For the first time during the fight, a smile creased the many-jowled face of Greasus, as he bared his bullion teeth in his obese face. Laying down his colossal scepter, the Overtyrant grabbed at the Black Orc war boss. Urk's twin axes bit deep into his foe's meaty, obese, cholesterol-enhanced chest. But undaunted by his own free-flowing blood, Greasus snatched up his opponent with both hands, and squeezed, and then squeezed some more. The sound of Urk's armor buckling and snapping under the massive pressure was audible, even over the cacophony of the battle. So too was the wet cracking that followed. For long minutes Greasus strained, until his bulging arms visibly shook at the effort. The crushed and twitching thing that the Overtyrant finally dropped was unrecognizable, for Greasus had literally squeezed all the fluids out of the lifeless husk. The ogres cheered, their hoarse bellows answered by geysers of flame erupting from the volcano. The sight was too much for the remaining greenskins, who turned and fled. The ogres regrouped, and as directed by the firebellies, gathered the slaughtered for a feast. And what a feast it was! Each and every ogre had to himself a heaped mound of greenskin dead to devour. Greasus Goldtooth had, in one massive stroke, broken the War and made absolute mush of its leader. Under the smoky gaze of the volcano god, Greasus had cemented his title of Overtyrant, for even those ogre tribes who were not at the battle were soon talking of the great triumph and its monumental victory feast. At the end of the week-long celebration, as the Firemouth vented molten anger into the sky, foretelling of yet greater battles to come, Greasus gave what to the ogres amounted as a long-winded speech. To the cheers of the assembled ogre kingdoms, Greasus bellowed,
Today the orcs, tomorrow the world. Let them all tremble!
It was also after this battle when Bragg created the death-dealing weapon known as Great Gut Gouger that earned him true notoriety as Bragg the Gutsman. The weapon was cobbled together after he broke his scimitar and then fashioned a polearm from the broken blades of a slain orc war boss, and the magically glowing steel was beaten and reformed using the magma of the Firemouth itself. Thus was born a legend. But that's for another video. Thanks for watching.
You don't want to look him in the eyeball, gun. Trust me on that. I saw him at the Battle of Blood Rock, and it weren't pretty. Scrag was all whirling cleavers, surrounded by red mist. Chunks of flesh and bone were flying everywhere. He went through them elves like a saber tusk through a bag of nobblers. Spears was breaking on his skin like he was made of rock. All the while those elves was screaming, and he was chopping them up and chucking the bits of their bodies into his pot. That was when the gorgers arrived, dozens of them, sniffing and grunting as they followed his scent. Then the real slaughter started. Lorehammer Library!
Scrag the Slaughterer is the legendary prophet of the Great Moor, also known as the Gore Harvester and the Moor that Walks. Dragging his massive meat pot behind him, attached to his back with a series of painful, tearing hooks and chains, Scrag hacks and rips at his enemies in a glorious, blood-fueled dedication to the Great Moor. In his wake, he leaves a trail of dismembered limbs and body parts, which it is the duty of his gore nobblers to retrieve and deposit into his cauldron. Once the head slaughtermaster of the tyrant Bron Rockgrinder, Scrag had a dramatic fall in fortune when he accidentally cooked and served up the tyrant's favoured noblar on a platter at a great feast. In a rage, the notoriously bad-tempered tyrant hacked off Scrag's hands and devoured them, cheered on by the drunken ogres at the feast, and then banished the slaughtermaster to the cursed undercaves of the mountain. Scrag was led from the feast in shame, beaten and bloody. As a final punishment, Rockgrinder ordered that Scrag's great cauldron be attached to his back by a series of chains and hooks anchored deep in the slaughtermaster's flesh. Scrag was hurled into the dreaded caverns beneath the mountain, and the way out sealed by a giant boulder. Refusing to despair, Scrag rammed his butcher's implements into his wrist stumps, forming makeshift weapons. Bleeding and bruised, Scrag stumbled ever deeper into the dank labyrinth, dragging his meat pot behind him until in the pitch darkness he was set upon by a pack of ravenous gorgers. Scrag hacked about him, ripping and cutting countless assailants, before he came face to face with a grotesque, hulking creature that ruled over the other gorgers. Scrag ripped the foul creature's throat out with his teeth. The other gorgers backed away from Scrag, respecting him as one of their own. Driven by visions of bloody revenge, Scrag led his gorgers up into the mountain through its internals until they resurfaced in the dead of night deep within the moor pit of Rockgrinder. Emerging in a frenzy, he led his gorgers in a grand feast dedicated to his god, ripping apart and consuming every ogre present after climbing out of the ceremonial pit. Rockgrinder himself was pulled apart and boiled in Scrag's meat pot as an offering to the Great Moor. As he made his dedication, Scrag felt his wounds knit together as powerful energies surged through his great body. Having emerged from the moor pit to devour his foes, Scrag is regarded with awe and fear even by the most terrible of tyrants, who see him as a living embodiment of their god, reborn through the moor pit, regurgitated by the Great Moor. His gorgers remain his ever-present guardians, shadowing him wherever he goes, for by following his familiar scent they are guaranteed fresh kills to feed their insatiable appetites, as much as they revere him as their saviour. When Scrag feeds his moor cauldron with bloody meat, he is rewarded with tremendous powers, blessing his frame, making him nearly unstoppable and able to withstand the most severe of wounds. It is only once battle has ended and there are none left to slaughter that his power diminishes, and the chains to his cauldron fall slack. Within days, however, visions drive him onwards to satiate his god's hunger, and so Scrag must once again seek battle. Brag the Gutsman is an infamous champion of the ogre race, and the self-proclaimed executioner of the Ogre Kingdoms. Ogres are a battle-hardened and fearless race, but there walks amongst their number one who is held in particular dread. Even veterans of 1,000 battles feel corpulent shivers at the very name of this killer among killers, this shadowy figure that deals out the most gruesome kind of death imaginable. He is the champion executioner of ogre kind, a slayer of kings and heroes. To see him on the field of battle is to see death itself at work. He is Brag the Gutsman, and none he is marked for slaughter have ever survived. When presented with his first blade to swing about with wild abandon, as is every young whelp, Brag showed great affinity for lopping off the heads of any nearby. It wasn't that Brag fought with grace or finesse, which are attributes that elude all ogres, but rather that he had a natural gift for landing blows to cause maximum damage. It was when Brag created the death-dealing weapon known as the Great Gut Gouger that he earned true notoriety. The weapon was cobbled together after Brag broke his scimitar at the Battle of Firemouth. He fashioned the polearm from the broken blades of a slain Black Orc warboss, and the magically glowing steel was beaten and reformed using the magma of the Firemouth itself. Thus was born a legend. Wielding the hook blade with prowess, Brag could slice off a foe's head with the flick of his powerful wrists. Time and again Brag slew foes, beheading orc chieftains, skaven warlords, and heavily armored champions of chaos. It was not until Brag turned his weapon against his own kind that his comrades learnt to know fear. During intertribal wars, Brag discovered the bladed hook could cut above a victim's gut plate and slice down to scoop out his foe's guts, sending them splashing wetly onto the ground. Ogres are used to heinous wounds, but disembowelments cause them to cringe in a special way. There can be no recovery from a gut blow, and with their extraordinary size it takes a long, painful time for the innards to fully uncoil outwards. Brag had become a much feared executioner, or gutsman, as the ogres called him. Since then Brag has travelled from tribe to tribe, seeking battle. He is always welcomed, for he is a powerful bruiser and helpful in a scrap. Champions of every race have fallen before Brag, dismembered by his strange weapon. To see the mightiest of their foes chopped down always raises cheers amongst the ogres. Yet sooner or later Brag finds himself called out or forced to settle with some internal challenger. After spilling his victim's guts in a brief duel, Brag finds himself no longer welcome. Even when killing a tyrant, Brag finds no tribe will follow him. So, shouldering the Great Gut Gouger, he moves on, forever seeking the next tribe where he might find work for his thirsty weapon. Brag feels the need to kill calling him, as surely as he feels the voracious stirring of the great maw in his own belly.
Little Empire people scared. I say, okay, don't bother me none. They scared, they pay on time, they keep me fed.
Man-eaters are veteran ogres of many campaigns fought in far-off lands. Travelling mercenaries beyond peer, they have spent decades accruing scars, tall tales, wealth, exotic war gear and skills before heading back to the Ogre Kingdoms. Man-eaters have fought throughout the Old World and beyond, and many races attempt to recruit such fighters into their armies, promising food, gold, or whatever else the ogres want in return for their services. It is the pay that matters, not the foe, although in some contracts man-eaters are awarded fallen enemies to eat, so that in these cases the enemy may matter. Ogres will eat anything, but they have preferences, certainly. Man-eaters inherit cultures of the lands they visit, rather than spreading their own. These mercenaries earn the fighting skills and adopt the style of dress appropriate to the lands in which they fight. For example, a man-eater in the Empire might wear breeches and an ostentatious feather with a brace of huge pistols across his chest. A man-eater campaigning in the jungles of the Southlands might go into battle as the savage orcs do, that is, wearing an undersized loincloth, a gut plate, and nothing else but smeary war paint, although more civilized folk might not want to visualize that. Man-eaters tend to operate in small groups, some of which have fought together for years. Despite their outlandish appearance, these tight-knit bands excel at breaking heads. It is rare for any two man-eaters to fight or be equipped in exactly the same manner, and opponents find themselves fighting against a dizzying array of different weapons and combat techniques. The only real factors uniting the individualistic man-eaters are their monumentally inflated sense of self-worth and their capacity to smash aside lesser creatures without breaking a sweat. When they return to the Ogre Kingdoms, man-eaters take an opportunity to bore their tribe mates with long, fanciful war stories, some of which are even true. Although such tales are tiresome, an ogre tyrant is always happy if he can call on the voices of one or two units of man-eaters to aid his tribe. They can be used to lead important attacks, or hold a vital part of the battle line. Man-eaters are famously stubborn opponents, and usually prefer to fight to their last breath rather than flee. After all, they have learned the hard way that if they run off in the course of a battle, they won't get paid.
Yes, I summoned them because I needed reinforcements. Yes, I know they are eating your prize cattle, and yes, I know ogres have large appetites. I put a notice on the local watchhouse offering a small payment to anyone with the wherewithal to make them go. That should prove more than sufficient.
Many ogres have left the tribal society of the Ogre Kingdoms in search of food in the Old World. The large cities of the Empire is where the ogres are almost an everyday sight. Here they serve in state armies and work as hired muscle. The Gaffers Guild, an organization of halfling building contractors, has an effective monopoly on ogres in the construction industry, much to the consternation of rival guilds. For reasons unknown, ogres and halflings seem to instinctively get along. Many important halflings employ ogre bodyguards. Conversely, ogre mercenary bands often travel with halfling cooks. This mutual bond may be down to a universal love of food, and also the fact that the halflings are the best cooks in the land, and so ogres have reason to keep them alive rather than eat them, because eating a halfling is barely going to be a snack for an ogre. Ogre Ogres speak a crude and often guttural language, which is known as Grumbath, or Ogrish to outsiders. Ogres, being completely illiterate, rely on crude cave paintings and a tradition of storytelling, which is recognizable to outsiders as just boasting, to convey the folk tales and legends of their civilization, if one can call it that. One of their earliest myths concerns Old Stone Guts, an ogre that caught and ate the sun one evening, but due to the heartburn it was causing him, threw it back up the very next morning. Ogres place great stock in feats of strength, and the mythology of the Ogre Kingdoms is continually fueled by the Herculean and often extremely exaggerated tasks undertaken by its inhabitants. Their strange language is never understood by other races, and it's hard even for ogres. This Grumbath is a snorting, growling language, although many ogres can get by in Norse and a smattering of other Old World languages. Few non-ogres know the language, although some mercenary commanders find its knowledge useful. Most ogrish idioms concern food and eating, and those ogres who speak human tongues have a habit of translating these literally, which creates interesting problems with communication. Slim is a term applied to most non-ogres in conversation, and occasionally an ogre will address another as such by way of an insult. Most of their terms for other races translate to food, victuals, or similar. One story sums up the typical ogrish attitudes to eating and fighting. An ogre mercenary captain is believed to have said to his human employer,
"Oi, Slim, shift your starters and we'll make breakfast."
which is roughly translatable as, "Insignificantly small person, if you would like to move your front rank out of the way, we shall engage the enemy." Ogres, being completely illiterate, rely on crude cave paintings. It should be noted that man-eaters, partially because of this problem, assimilate much of the culture of those lands they visit, and this includes languages, so typically when dealing in mercenary contracts, they will learn Reichspiel, and Gold-Flag Man-Eater is known to speak Reichspiel fluently. Who could forget the ogres? Not anyone with a sense of smell, that's for sure. Worse manners than trolls, and that's saying something, but there are few troops you'd rather have on your side in the heat of the battle. Golgfag Man-Eater is an infamous ogre mercenary captain, whose fame has made all other ogre mercenaries adopt the name Man-Eaters. Possibly one of the most successful ogre mercenaries of all time, Golgfag Man-Eater forged a reputation for ogres as fearsome killers for hire long before they became a relatively common sight in the mercenary armies of the Old World. Although he could be mistaken for a mere bruiser, Golgflag has been in active service for over 60 years and has considerable tactical acumen to go with his lattice-like network of scar tissue. Golgflag's reputation and wealth have grown so considerable that in recent years he has begun to hire his own mercenary armies, including more and more ogres as the Great Migration gathers speed. The term Man-Eater was first coined when, after a drunken argument, Golgfag ate his paymaster whole and left carrying his coffers. He insists this day that his name is misleading, for, just like the faithful band of violent thugs that travel with him, Golgfag really isn't that fussy about what or who he eats. Golgfag is the biggest, ugliest, and quite definitely the loudest ogre to shamble out of the eastern wastes in living memory. Born from the Saber Tribe, Golgflag soon found himself leading a bunch of almost equally brutal ogre warriors. He quickly developed a taste for man flesh, and joined forces with an orc war boss named Nashrak Badtooth. Nashrak was busy fighting against the dwarfs of Karak Kadrin, high up in the World's Edge Mountains. Golgfag wasn't sure he liked the taste of dwarf, but was more than happy to find out. Gashrak thought the ogres would prove just the kind of troops he needed to sort out the dwarfs. However, he soon grew tired of the ogres' appetite for goblins, booze, and raucous singing. After one particularly loud drinking session, Golgfag and Nashrak got into a huge fight. Soon all the ogres and orcs were scrapping. Golgfag tore off the orc's arm and used it to bash his way out of the encampment before leading his lads to safety. Nashrak was completely enraged. Golgfag promptly offered his services to the dwarf king, Ungrim Ironfist. He showed Nashrak's arm to Ungrim as proof of his sincerity. In the face of such convincing offer, Ironfist was hardly able to refuse. Golgfag led his ogres and a party of dwarfs along a secret track into the orcs' encampment in Broken Leg Gully, so called because of its impossibly steep and treacherous sides. The orcs were trapped and horribly slaughtered. Nashrak was captured and subsequently bound in chains and delivered to Ungrim Ironfist. Although handsomely paid, Golgfag looted the king's treasury during the ensuing celebrations, and then headed west to the Empire. There he took employment in the ranks of the Imperial Army, and it was here that he discovered halflings were by far his favourite food. Shortly afterwards, he turned up in the lands of Tilea, in the employ of one Lorenzo Lupo. Lorenzo found the ogres to be excellent troops, but a considerable nuisance. The citizens of Lucini were forever complaining of being beaten, robbed, or bullied by the rowdy ogres. One night, Golgfag decided to take rather more than his fair share of wine, directly from Lorenzo's warehouses. When the ogres fell into a drunken stupor, Lorenzo sent a company of pikemen to arrest them and throw them out into his dungeons. Fortunately for Lorenzo, an opportunity to be rid of the ogres altogether arrived in the form of a messenger from one of the border princes. The messenger was hiring mercenaries on behalf of his master. Lorenzo cheerfully fitted him up with the ogres, took his fee, and released Golgfag and his crew from captivity. Golgfag was understandably annoyed, but faced with a new offer of employment, a complimentary baggage train of food, and a firing line of Tilean crossbowmen, the ogre decided to let matters lie, for the moment at least. Golgfag's stay in the border princes proved a successful and profitable one. The ogres grew fat and wealthy. They were kept busy by one side or the other, and were given every chance to indulge their appetite for fresh meat. Golgfag's only regret was the scarcity of halflings thereabouts. Around this time he is known to have made a stint on the high seas. When he heard that the trouble was brewing between the orcs and dwarfs, he headed northwards once more. He fell in with a bunch of orcs and goblins, and was soon feasting upon dwarf once again. It was after a foray against the dwarfs that Golgfag was ambushed by none other than Ungrim Ironfist, his former employer. The canny Slayer King led an orc army into a trap, using the supply convoy as bait. The convoy consisted entirely of wagons full of cheap ale, which the greenskins duly captured and drained. Golgfag and the ogres courageously drank themselves into oblivion along with the rest. When they awoke, the ogres found themselves in dungeons deep below Karak Kadrin, along with the remnants of the orc army. The dwarfs no doubt expected Golgfag to die in his cramped and crowded dungeon, and possibly thought this would be easier and safer than trying to kill the ogre in some other fashion. When the dwarfs finally opened the dungeon some months later, they were startled to find Golgfag still alive. He had eaten every other inmate of the dungeon, including the rest of the ogres apart from Scaff. Out of respect for his oldest drinking buddy, Golgfag had only, so far, eaten one of Scaff's legs. A great pile of orc, goblin and ogre bones lay in one corner. When he heard this, Ungrim Ironfist was so impressed that he ordered Golgfag to be taken a long way away and released, like a sentimental mother with a rat in a trap. Golgfag soon gathered together some of his old lads, and other keen young ogres flocked to join him. Scaff decided to stick with Golgfag despite everything, and gratefully accepted the position of standard-bearer, as this gave him something to lean on. Before the summer was out, Golgfag headed south over the Grey Mountains in company with an orc raiding party. It was there that he fought his first battles against Bretonnians, where he first sampled tinned food, which became ogre slang for knights. From that day to this, Golgfag has never looked back. His reputation has, if anything, grown and grown.
And so has his girth.
But he still has a few scores to settle. Not least with the dwarfs of Karak Kudrin, but with the treacherous Lorenzo Lupo. However, ogres are straightforward folk, and such things take a second place to a good fight. And a full belly, of course. More tales are told about Golgfag than any other ogre alive, and Golgfag himself spins a great many of them, truly or untruly. Though he exaggerates with wild abandon, Golgfag is still the most successful of all ogre mercenary captains. He has won countless battles, looted upon the island of Ulthuan, set eyes upon the ruinous Skaven blight, and survived. Guzzled more kegs of Bugman's XXXXXX than most dwarfs have ever seen, and has been personally decorated by Emperor Karl Franz. Golgfag has travelled the world, and his cronies, known unimaginatively as Golgfag's man-eaters, have gained wide notoriety as being battle-hardened killers. Over the course of his adventures, Golgfag has won and lost more fortunes than there are nobblers in the hills. His wanderlust prevents him from becoming a great leader, but earns him plenty of loot and renown. As I said, his title of man-eater was coined when he ate his human paymaster, and such is his fame that the man-eater is now a general term for any ogre who travels the lands as a sellsword. At last sighting, Golgfag has returned to the Ogre Kingdoms to recruit more ogres to his famed regiment. Where he'll head next is anyone's guess.
Going to cry? Piss your pants, maybe? Maybe shit and come.
If my life was a movie, I would have a...
If he looks like he could stare down a pack of angry cave bears, he's a hunter. You can tell, 'cause he'll be wearing a couple of them as proof.
Hunters are among the most massive and independent of their kind, and think nothing of climbing to the top of a mountain whilst tracking a wounded mammoth or bull rhinox. An ogre becomes a hunter either by temporarily severing his ties to his tribe to slate his wanderlust, or by being exiled to the harsh white wilderness of the mountain for some slight to his fellow ogres. Either way, these ties are not completely severed, and a hunter that excels at his solitary lifestyle may drag an impressive kill or two back to the caves on important feast days if he chooses to attempt to re-ingratiate himself with the tribe. A hunter is generally covered in a network of scars and tattoos, overlaid by the thick pelts of his prey to provide protection from the arctic conditions of the Mountains of Morn. He decorates himself with tusks, claws, fangs, and skulls of the cave beasts that he has single-handedly killed and eaten. A hunter will typically have a great beast's skull strapped to his gut, rather than a traditional gut plate, to illustrate his prowess. Although most no longer belong to a tribe, hunters will drag their kills back on special feast days. While some hunters return to the tribe of their origins, others wander throughout the Ogre Kingdoms. They're popular visitors, for not only do they drag down some of the largest carcasses, but they liven up any feast with their rich wealth of stories about life on the mountaintops. The profusion of horrible scars and displays of beast skulls and impressive tusks also go a long way towards earning the respect of the local tribe. Before long, however, a hunter's solitary ways will take over, and he will amble back up the slopes to the higher echelons of the mountain climate. In honor of the first ogre hunter, Jared the Red, it is common for a hunter to keep a saber tusk or two to help sniff out his cave beast prey. These giant, agile feline predators often have tusks jutting from their lower jaws, used for ripping out the guts of a beast larger than they are. Those that prove too difficult to domesticate instead provide both a good fight and a good meal for their would-be keeper. It is rare, the hunter indeed, that does not boast a set of claw scars somewhere on his person from such an engagement. A hunter must learn how best to stalk his quarry. Each beast is formidable in its own right, and a hunter must discover techniques to deal with monstrous creatures of all sorts. For instance, it takes great patience to creep into an ambush position near the caves of the great bear-like crag beasts, while it takes fast-paced double-tracking trickery to throw off a pack of saber tusks once they have caught your scent. Knowing how to escape the first blast of icy breath from a frost drake, or where to aim a throwing spear to best dispatch a mournfang, are lessons that a hunter must pick up quickly. All hunters bear horrific scars, suffered from their many battles with the monstrous denizens of the mountains. Those few errors that don't prove fatal still hurt. Ogre hunters are solitary wandering ogres, outsiders from their own tribe or perhaps even exiles. The ones that survive become fiercely independent and savvy stalkers of beasts and warriors in their own right. Bereft of a tribe's protection and beefy companionship, the lone hunter must learn to track and kill, while simultaneously not becoming prey to any ferocious beasts himself. It is all too common for a hunter to become the hunted. To ward off the severe cold, the hunters are layered in skins and pelts that they accumulate over their career. It can also be recognized for their tendency to carry an arsenal of weapons, trapping gear and skinning knives, adding to their versatility in combat. When one's days are spent stalking ogre-eating carnivores, it's best to be prepared. Hunters are incredibly proficient with their specialized gear, able to kill beasts on the move even at range. Ogres first encountered the Saber Tusks during the big migration from the ruined plains. Although many stragglers were picked off and eaten by the predators, the ogres unsurprisingly found much to admire in the Saber Tusk, and may have even learned how to take down large creatures by watching a pride work together to slay a beast many times their own size. It is said that the greatest of the ogre hunters, Jared the Red, was the first to keep saber tusks in order to help him sniff out and hunt cave beasts. In honor of Jared the Red, many hunters still tame their own saber tusks. Large sets of claw scars are common sights amongst such hunters, for some beasts simply refuse to be domesticated. Once broken into service, A hunter will send his Saber Tusks to chase down vulnerable or wounded victims, or to soften up a foe ahead of his attack. Saber Tusks are powerfully built hunting cats, most noted for their extended canines which jut boldly out of their lower jaws. They hunt individually or in small packs, and are known to be aggressive carnivores. When it attacks, a Saber Tusk uses its elongated, tusk-like teeth to slash and stab, hoping to sever arteries or disembowel its quarry. Saber Tusks often hunt in large packs, enabling them to bring down enormous animals. They have been known to track and kill beasts as big as ice mammoths. When conditions are right, a Saber Tusk prefers to spring from ambush, or at least stalk its prey, patiently awaiting an opportunity to attack unawares, leaping on a victim's side or rear. Regardless of its angle, once it commits to an attack, the saber does so with savage ferocity, although the fickle beasts are not above turning tail and bolting should the initial thrusts go poorly. Only upon killing its mark will the muscular beasts utter a sound, unleashing a loud and rasping roar of victory, and baring its blood-stained tusks. Saber Tusks are most associated with colder climes, and are regularly found prowling the mountain slopes above the tree line. However, the canny feline hunters will go wherever their prey takes them. Packs of Saber Tusks are known to regularly descend into lowland areas in pursuit of large game. There are tales of the predators stalking the tar pits and ooze geysers of the Darklands, where they make easy meals out of anything foolish enough to get stuck in the bubbling pits. No matter where they are found, many hunters seek Saber Tusks, for their distinctive striped hides are coveted across the old world and as far away as Ulthuan. Red in tooth and claw, the powerfully muscled hunting beast is a creature perfectly evolved for slaughter. A lone Saber Tusk will bound to the midst of its prey, slashing and stabbing with its elongated tusks, seeking to sever arteries and disembowel. Should an entire pack of Saber Tusks attack at once, then even the largest beasts that haunt the Mountains of Morn can quickly be brought down in a howling flurry, leaving a red mist hanging in the frosty air. The Scrap Launcher is an impressive war machine. It is a large and unconventionally built catapult, pulled along by an enormous woolly beast. Its design is haphazard, the ramshackle construction seemingly built on the go, with a random collection of cast-off materials. With each stride of the shaggy beast of burden, the jittery device teeters precariously while a frantic crew of nobblers swarm around, running alongside, clambering on its ropes and pulleys like sailors amongst the rigging, or just hanging on for dear life. For all its slovenly appearance, the Nobbler Scrap Launcher is a devastating engine of destruction. Too slight or lazy to lift rocks, the Nobblers pack the launcher cup with bundles of weapons that have been accrued during battle. As the so-called thinling weapons are too tiny for ogres and too large for nobblers, they are used as ammunition. These loose-knit bundles of nastiness are hurled towards an enemy like a deadly rain. While the deluge of sharp instruments may sometimes only pincushion the ground or clang loudly against a foe, so many lethally sharp bits fly through the air that odds are at least a few will strike tender flesh. After the battle, it is a simple matter to gather the weapons back during the pre-feast corpse harvest. Many of the blades have seen more battles than the nobblers who fire them. The beast that tows the scrap launcher is usually a rhinox. Adult rhinoxen are simply too stubborn to haul anything, but the younger ones are not yet so strong-willed and so are selected instead. Other creatures have been tried, from the Mournfang to the Thunder Tusk and even Stonehorn, but the results are unfavourable at best, with lots of smashed timber and squished out knobbler-shaped blotches left behind. A Rhinox, even a young one, is a massive creature that hardly strains to pull the constructions of the nobblers, including great sledges topped with loading platforms, winches, and even vast support beams braced onto the beast itself. Unlike most other war machines, the scrap launcher moves at a steady clip and is just as deadly smashing into enemy units as it is at shooting, the Rhinox being too willing to put down its head and charge to let any melee combat go to waste. Several times the size of a Rhinox, and even several times as dense, a Stonehorn in a destructive rage is the kind of sight that causes ogres to gape in slack-jawed wonderment, for it is a display of raw, unthinking strength. It is common in ogre camps to hear awed tales of Stonehorns shattering cliffsides or battering down mountain peaks, and these are not exaggerations, but everyday occurrences. Stonehorns live by mining rock, breaking off suitable chunks by smashing their impressively horned heads into the largest rock facings they can find. Deposits of precious stone and seams of rare metal are favoured, but the creature will use its iron-hard molars to crunch up mundane rubble or any mammals caught out of their dens. Yet as impressive as such feats are, they pale before the sight of a Stonehorn in combat. Intolerant to an extreme, a Stonehorn's first inclination is to charge any creature that comes within view. This is no mere bluff or half-hearted measure to scare off any who draw near, but instead a full-tilt attempt to use its horns and bulk to pulverize anything in its way. Few can bear the brunt of such a collision. The Stonehorn can smash mountains asunder, so what hope does a creature of flesh and blood have to stand before such a beast? A Stonehorn's ferocity is not bound only in its charge. After impact, the great beast will rear up on its thick haunches to deliver crushing blows with its forelimbs, hammer blows that can crack a glacier or smash stone to powder. With a growling fury, the Stonehorn will swing its horns in sweeping arcs, seeking to slice foes with the surprisingly sharp ridges that form on its stone prongs. Naturally, ogres have the greatest respect for Stonehorns, for mammoth creatures are everything an ogre aspires to be: big, violent, strong, and rock-hard. They never tire of telling and retelling their favourite accounts of a Stonehorn's prowess, or of the gory aftermath they leave after one of their stone-cracking charges. Whether it is the wide tails of dwarfs that were flattened and squished out of their armour, or the wet crunching sounds a Stonehorn makes when ploughing through skaven hordes, or fond remembrances of giants, pile-driven deep into the ground, such blood-drenched tales are greedily called for and laughed about at any raucous ogre feast. In their constant quest to headbutt things, Stonehorns often scrape skin, tendon, and meat from their faces, leaving bare patches or glimpses of skull-like stone mask. Over their long lives, Stonehorns become more like the mountains upon which they grace, in a slow process of petrification. It's not the only effect of the Stonehorn's unnatural diet, for their bodies are dotted with mineral deposits the way freckles appear on humans, and the skull of an elder beast can house enough gems to make a merchant prince weep. Getting hold of those riches is difficult. Only a fool comes with sniffing distance of a live Stonehorn, and those that die of natural causes are secretive, plodding off to hidden vales before fully transforming into stone. Those that stumble across such hidden grounds are struck by the eeriness of the silent statues. Of all the Stonehorn's burial grounds scattered around the Mountains of Morn, the largest and most sought after is the Granite Tooth Graveyard. Here the chill wind gusts around hundreds of petrified Stonehorns, their statue-still bodies covered in thick layers of ice and snow. In the shadows of these great beasts, sheltered from the worst of the flesh-biting storms, can be found the littered bones of countless adventurers who foolishly sought their fortune in this dangerous, treacherous land. Beside the skeletons of men lie those of dwarfs, who believed that the hearts of the Stonehorns transformed into giant blood diamonds upon their deaths, and skaven who heard tales that the fearsome beasts turned into solid warpstone inside. It is perhaps unsurprising that so many expeditions have ended in disaster, for in the blizzard-like conditions that perpetually engulf the Granite Tooth Graveyard, it is extremely difficult to tell the difference between a dead Stonehorn and a dying beast whose body is still undergoing the final stages of petrification. These ancient Stonehorns stand virtually motionless amidst the forest of their deceased kin, their frost-covered forms indistinguishable from great statues. However, when mining tools and pickaxes bite into their rocky skin and chip away gemstones, fossilized eyelids suddenly crack open, a sound that is almost imperceptible in the howling winds, and the only warning that the treasure seekers have just made the greatest mistake of their lives. An ogre hunter who has tamed a Stonehorn is a celebrated individual. Stonehorns are so oblivious to the most grievous wounds that the only proven way to break one is to take one of its eyes, which is no mean feat given the beast's stone-armoured skull. To achieve this, a hunter must stand in the path of a Stonehorn charge, and as the ground shakes, stick a spear or land a harpoon in its eye socket. Those who miss seldom live to tell the tale, but those lucky enough to make the shot will be confronted with a rare sight indeed. That of a Stonehorn halting mid-charge, as it registers pain for perhaps the first time in its long life. The hunter can then lead the Stonehorn back to his cave by yanking upon the embedded shaft. After a time the wound heals, often the eye even grows back, but by then the Stonehorn has been persuaded to allow a rider. A hunter might keep such a beast as his own mount, or if he wishes to boost his reputation, he could gift the beast to a tribe, for Stonehorns are much coveted by all right-thinking ogres.
Ogres!
The dwarfs cried, and the crack of thunderers and cannon fire blasted into that stormy night. Then something huge loomed out of the snow, a primordial beast that had walked the frozen earth before the sun had any warmth. Bull-like it charged the cliff face in which the watchpost was carved, its enormous tusks smashing into the now brittle rock. The stronghold was breached, and great chunks of the rock fell. The Thunder Tusk began to feed, sifting through the broken rocks to pluck out the fallen dwarfs. In moments, the watchpost was just piled rubble and a broken rock face. The road westwards, clear for the ogre army to stomp through. There was no stopping them now.
Lorehammer Library!
Thunder Tusks are creatures of ice and doom, ancient monsters that strode the darkest ages long ago, when the world was frozen over. Retreating from the sudden warming of the sun, the forefathers of these mammoth beasts headed to the northern plains where they became saturated in the magic that was unleashed in those strange lands during the Great Catastrophe. Imbued by these unnatural winds, The Thunder Tusks became living embodiments of cruel and ever-enduring winter, primordial things from a long-forgotten past. Their hulking mass exudes an aura, a sub-zero blast of Arctic air, so cold that it congeals blood and freezes their prey. Thunder Tusks advance as relentlessly as a winter storm, using their numbing airs to slow their victims down, allowing the beasts to bring their cumbersome but crushing mass to bear. Thunder Tusks are solitary wanderers that travel across the cold places of the world, far to the north or high amidst the frozen peaks of mountains. Needing a great deal of sustenance to sustain their bulk and icy nimbus, they are constantly roaming in search of fresh meat. But the Thunder Tusk is not just deadly up close, where it can stomp its frozen foes flat. A Thunder Tusk's horns attract the elemental power of magic, like a lightning conductor. The beast's icy breath mixes with its sorcerous flux, coalescing into swirling spheres of eldritch energy and jagged shards of ice. With a sound akin to the peal of a thunderclap, the Thunder Tusk can hurl those frozen orbs across the battlefield. Upon impact, the glowing sphere of frost shatters, sending lightning-wreathed icicles spinning through the air. The shards scythe into any exposed flesh, cutting bloody holes into anything within a wide radius. Because of its unnatural penchant for frost, Thunder Tusks become extremely irritable and uncomfortable in direct sunshine as a result. Shedding patches of skin and cultivating coats of icicles upon their pelt can only compensate so much, and so the Thunder Tusk has developed a unique mechanism for surviving the heat during the relentless, fairer seasons when temperatures rise slightly above freezing. During any prolonged warm spell, a Thunder Tusk will hibernate within its chosen glacier, hacking and scooping out a crude cave with its gigantic blade-edged tusks until it can retreat from the punishing rays of the sun. There, in a cocoon of ice, the beast will slow its heartbeat and lower its body temperature further still, allowing the Thunder Tusk's freezing breath to slowly crystallize the moisture until the beast is completely surrounded in cooling ice. Save from the predation of beasts and ogre tribes of the mountains, the Thunder Tusk sleeps through the summer in its frozen refuge, healing the damage it sustained during mating season and slowly digesting the massive quantities of meat that it gorges upon before each hibernation period. When the days begin to shorten and the length of the sun retreats once again, the Thunder Tusk will gradually raise its heartbeat and exert maximum effort upon the glacier around it. Eventually, through sheer brawn, and with numerous shifts of its massive shoulders and muscular haunches, the Thunder Tusk will burst free in a shower of ice shards and roar its victory over the sun. Hungry beyond measure, it will rampage over the mountainsides, generating a shimmering chill that numbs the air. Thunder Tusks use their great tusks to scoop up any living creature they can find, tossing them into the air and catching them in their blunt maws to devour. When they meet on the mountainous slopes, ogres and Thunder Tusks eye each other warily. For a strong meat-gathering party or highly skilled hunter are some of the few predators that can actually bring down such a beast. A slain Thunder Tusk is a great boon to a hungry ogre tribe, but slaying one is no easy business. They are known to crush, gouge, and freeze their way through most attacks. Occasionally, though, a tribe will manage to bring low an injured Thunder Tusk, and by the force of chains and the thickness of an ogre's forearm, stout clubs and copious quantities of red meat, they manage to train the beast. Captured Thunder Tusks are kept in chains and dragged about for a long time. but could eventually coexist alongside ogre tribes, and even broken in to permit a few riders to sit upon their enormously broad shoulders. Thus a Thunder Tusk will eventually join a tribe, becoming a living engine of frozen destruction. The massive mounts give the ogres that ride them an extra 20 tons of brute force to smash things with, an excellent view of the battlefield, and also an ice-cold walking larder with which to keep their meat fresh. In battle, Thunder Tusks are used to blast the foe with ranged attacks and to lend support to the main ogre battle line. Towering high above the heads of all but the tallest combatants, the Thunder Tusk and its crew unleash a hail of fire even as they advance upon the foe. A Thunder Tusk will often aim to crash into the enemy lines at the same time as the bulk of the ogre attack, supporting their bone-crunching charge with its own chilling aura of frozen doom.
Back when the world was young, they was our brothers. They ain't much to look at now, too cold by half, and no fun at a feast. But they're fast, and they ain't forgotten how to kill.
Yeti are creatures of ice and frost. The pale pelts of the Yeti make them hard to spot in the snowy landscape, and only when their shaggy hair is overly matted and speckled with blood are they easy to pick out. There is a strange and almost supernatural connection between the Yeti and the high-altitude mountains themselves. Indeed, the Yeti exude an aura of cold, so powerful that those attacked by them will find their limbs stiffened and joints frozen, making them easy prey for those fierce and feral predators. A large-scale attack by a whole pack of Yeti is inevitably heralded by an avalanche, which the creatures trigger deliberately in order to trap their prey, before loping down the side of the mountain to claw out and devour their half-frozen victims. The Yeti packs inhabit the highest slopes of many mountain ranges, but are particularly common amongst the Mountains of Morn, and the place of their birth, the towering peaks of the ancient giant holds. There, the roof of the world, the Yetis survive by preying on the beast herds that dwell alongside them. They are powerful and can sprint as fast as an armored horse. Because of this, they are usually used by an ogre tyrant, in much the same way cavalry are in other armies, to deliver swift attacks on weapon points in the enemy line, and to help pursue a defeated opponent from the battlefield. With their sheer brute strength and ferocious nature, Yetis can smash a hole in any enemy battle line, or maul any opponent that dares to stand up to them. Yeti have developed long fused claws that are the natural equivalent of climbing pittons, with dew claws on the back hinge, allowing them to climb features other races could not negotiate. A blow from a Yeti's iron-hard claws rips off limbs and heads with ease, and they are also ideal for quickly digging out half-frozen victims buried by snow and ice. Even with their deadly claws, a vestige of ogre-like behavior does remain in the Yeti's ancestry to ensure that they still use clubs of a sort, fashioning ice weapons by the same expedient method of snapping a bough from a tree and breathing pure cold onto it until it resembles a massive ice-encrusted club. Dominant Yetis sometimes use pairs of these, smashing apart anything in their path. The Yeti that spend too much time in the lowlands, to them anything not above the cloud line, become lethargic and sickly, and will begin to wither beneath the hot sun. For these reasons, once their obligation to the ogres is complete, the Yeti will lope back to their mountainous lairs. It is not uncommon for an ogre tribe to include some Yeti amongst its ranks. How or why the Yetis are convinced to fight alongside the ogres is a subject of much speculation. Some scholars suggest that Yeti are a remote offshoot of the ogre species dating back to the Big Migration. Others theorize that the Yeti owe the ogres a great debt from somewhere in their distant past, even before they evolved into creatures of ice and snow, and hence their habitual reply to the ogre's summons to war is one of their ancestral honor, rather than any kind of learned response. Perhaps this is something to do with the war in the heavens between the ogres and giants. But whatever the truth of the matter, an ogre tyrant is able to summon Yeti to war by a blast on the great horn, a huge curling tusk taken from the largest ice mammoth killed by the tribe. The acoustic qualities of this horn, twinned with the mighty lungs of the ogre sounding it, send the blast echoing into the peaks of the mountain range. Riding great avalanches of snow, the Yeti will enter the Ogre Kingdoms, ready for the great hunt that is open war. Those who travel the mountain passes know the threat posed by these savage packs of creatures. Living above the tree line, Yeti are hairy, ape-armed humanoids with ravenous hunger for flesh. With their pale fur and penchant for lurking buried in the snowdrifts that cap the highest mountains, Yeti stalk unseen while keeping a wary watch over highland paths. When their quarry is spotted, perhaps armed convoys daring passage over the high passes, or herds of creatures such as rhinox or ice mammoths, the Yeti surround the prey and trigger an avalanche. Tons of snow plunges down the mountainside, closely followed by the loping Yeti, who can scale sheer cliff faces and negotiate steep drops at speed. With their foes crushed by rocks and snow, the Yeti dig out their half-frozen victims using their talons and lop off limbs and heads, soaking the snow with blood. Some Yeti use crude clubs, encrusted with blocks of ice, and those are the perfect instrument with which to batter foes to a pulp. The few that survive such attacks claim that the Yeti themselves are forms of Ice Witch. The Mournfang cavalry are arguably the heaviest of their kind, with the Ogre Kingdoms utilizing them to brutal effect as a powerful shock force that can literally mow down an entire enemy formation in a great thunderous charge. It is this bold resilience that attracts ogres to Mournfangs, for it is hard not to respect an animal that will continue to bite and slash even when its brain has ceased to function. Ogres have tried to capture and break the beasts for mounts since they first encountered the Mournfangs way back in history, although for centuries every attempt ended in death or crippling injury for the ogre. Over the years it has become a sort of rite of ogrehood, as young aspirants head up the mountains in their attempts to capture one of the savage beasts. Few survive the brutal encounter, for the Mournfangs are strong enough to take down any ogre bull. But such are the rewards for claiming these mighty beasts that many still continue this fatal tradition, even at the cost of many lives. High up on the slopes of the Mountains of Mourn lives a cave-dwelling beast that has always attached the attention of the ogres, the Mournfang. Aggressive predators that resemble a blend between the shaggy rhinoxen and the ferocious Saber Tusk. Mournfang packs are led by the largest of their kind, and working together they can hunt and kill anything that lives in that harsh domain. Mournfangs have a notorious tenacity, that makes even the most powerful of creatures think twice about confronting them. Ogres' tales tell of defiant Mournfangs blocking cave entrances or refusing to give ground, and every tribe has a story about a beast continuing to fight long after drawing its last breath. Mightily built beasts, almost hunched with their own coiled muscles, Mournfangs are straightforward hunters. Upon spying their prey, they prefer to charge their quarry, hurtling forward themselves and pouncing at maximum velocity. The impact of such strikes alone can snap a full-grown ogre in two. Once engaged, a Mournfang will use its ripping claws and powerful jaws to savage its victim. Working together, a pack of Mournfangs can hunt and kill anything that lives in that harsh domain, and even whole ogre tribes have retreated before a hungry pack. Their toughened hides and thick matted fur make them incredibly resilient, but it is their relentless nature that inspired countless tales. It is said that a Mournfang, even when slain, will not relax its bite, but will continue to hold on in a death grip. Woe to anything that crosses paths with a hungry hunting pack. It was one ogre by the name of Rollgut Hamfist's discovery of the leadership challenges amongst the Mournfang packs that led to the first successful capture. In battles reminiscent of tyrant challenges in the Moorpit, the largest Mournfangs engage in their own violent fights to claim the pack's alpha position. Their bloody and protracted contests result in the death of the losing beast, as even those bad-tempered hulks of muscle and matted hair can bleed to death. The victor will be exhausted and have lost a lot of blood as a result of the fight. As Rollgut discovered, this was in fact the best time for an ogre to vault onto a Mournfang's back. If the ogre could hold on during the wild ride that followed, it could remain atop the beast until it passed out from blood loss and exertion. From then on, the groggy Mournfang would finally come to and concede to its new master. Ogres that fall off during the violent rodeo are of course gored and eaten by their quarry. For successful aspirants, there follows a period in which the would-be Mournfang rider must remain strong in the saddle at all times, steering the beast with his club. The Mournfang, its walnut-sized brain addled by the repeated blows, finally becomes fully accustomed to bearing a rider. Once a Mournfang has been broken in this manner, it is nearly possible to domesticate it, and the great beast must live and travel with the ogre tribe. Mournfang in such captivity do not breed, however, so ogres must still climb the mountains to seek out Mournfang packs in the midst of their own leadership challenges, and the race of these domesticated Mournfang will forever remain wild and untouched by selective breeding. There is a fortune to be made as a mercenary for any young ogre with his own Mournfang, of course, and every spring a few stout lads from the upper slopes will join together and sell their services as the heaviest shock cavalry in the known world. Powered by thick haunches of purest muscle, Mournfangs surge towards the foe at a speed faster than their muscle-bulked frames would suggest, not slowed in the least by the large ogre or saddle atop its hairy back. Protected by thick skin and coarse shaggy hair, enemy arrows bounce off the oncoming beast, or ping off the ogre's armor as harmless as hailstones. When they do smash into an enemy, the powerful Mournfangs chomp, slash, and stamp the foe whilst the ogres lay about them, swinging ponderous clubs to bludgeon the foe. The results are devastating, with the fallen not just slain, but utterly pulverized, pounded into the bloody ground by a profusion of deadly blows. Although whole units of Mournfang cavalry can usually secure the victory of any battle that they are engaged in, These brutes and their gigantic steeds do not come cheap, and the tyrants or paymasters of the victorious side often notice a profound feeling of loss when the spoils of war are shared out to these gigantic cataphracts. Firebellies are the roaring, blazing priests of the ogre deity known as the Firemouth. Quick to mirth and anger alike, firebellies are garrulous and vital individuals who are readily welcomed into any ogre tribe. Fire burns within these larger-than-life prophets in a literal as well as a metaphorical sense. Bald and broad, their ruddy skin glows from within, and their bare chests are tattooed extensively with symbols of destruction. When a firebelly's wrath is roused, he can breathe out a cloud of billowing flame so fierce that it can melt through chainmail in seconds. The Firemouth is the largest and most powerful volcano in the Mountains of Morn by far. It is an important figure in ogre mythology, revered alongside the Great Moor by all ogres, and worshipped fervently by those tribes that have witnessed the violence of its mighty eruptions firsthand. Every year, dozens of ogre pilgrims flock to the sides of the Firemouth, and announce their presence to the small but influential tribe that makes its home in the caves nestled into the volcano slopes. As magma courses down the sides of the Firemouth like drool from a butcher's gob, the aspirants dare to undergo the grueling flame trial, a mysterious ritual held by the Firebelly tribe as their volcano god rumbles in his sleep. As will all other religious occasions in the Ogre Kingdoms, this trial by fire begins and ends with the act of ingesting something. First, the hopeful ogre must gobble down an entire cauldron full of flame toad and devil pepper curry, the repugnant mixture also useful for ending protracted sieges. Even as his gut burns, he must then catch some of the cart-horse-sized fire beetles that burrow through the lava streams and devour the critter in a single sitting. It is the final task, however, that is the deadliest of all. Before being accepted and becoming a firebelly, the aspirant must drink the blood of the Firemouth. The supplement first climbs to the top of the lip of the cauldron-like structure of the titanic volcano. The sight of the lake of bubbling, hissing magma below is impressive enough to take the breath away, even before the sulphurous stench assails the nostrils. Many contenders flee at this point, content with smelling the products of the Firemouth's digestive tract. But those with the courage to continue are slowly lowered on thick chains inside the mouth of the volcano. The heat is such that their hair is burnt from their bodies to the root, never to return, and their eyes boil in their sockets. But the truly faithful will persevere, scooping up a skull full of roiling lava. After being hauled back up the edge of the Firemouth, the ogre must gulp the molten rock down in a single draught. This last act is lethal even for the most gastronomically involuble ogre. Only those with the blessing of the volcano god can survive. The survival and subsequent initiation of a new firebelly happens perhaps a few times every decade, and often coincides with a major outburst of flame from the Firemouth itself. This is seen as a sure signal that it is time to make war on the lands of the weak, with the size of the battles to come coinciding with the strength of the eruption. In war, the firebellies are well equipped to aid the ogres, for the disciples of the volcano inherit supernatural powers. They bear a measure of protection against the fiercest conflagrations, and breathe out an inferno upon their foes, and can even cast and control flaming spells. The Firemouth has only a few priests on hand at any time, for they are never many, and most of their kind are journeying alone in the OGRE Kingdoms. There a Firebelly will join a tribe for a time, spreading the creed of their molten-hearted god and bringing fiery destruction on foes. They are lively and popular transients, and fill ogres full of wonder with their ability to bleed magma and cause a wreath of flames about their bodies with each burst of explosive flatulence.